Okay. Okay. It's time for us to continue. Everyone settles down. Thank you for coming back from lunch in record time. And I'm now delighted to introduce the Managing Director of EEF, Dr. Kraut. Dr. Kraut, we hoped would join us this morning, but after agreeing to come, he was then asked to attend a cabinet meeting with the Prime Minister, and we thought that should probably take priority over us. In fact, he's got to go back to the cabinet meeting after he has spoken, so we're very lucky to have him at all. So, Dr. Kraut.
Thank you very much, Paul. I will start my speech this afternoon in English, and then I will continue in Thai to make sure that I can connect with all of you that come from many countries across the world. And then for those of you who join us on site or online in Thailand. And for today, I think we have a very high privilege and a humble experience for EEF as a co-host with the CCE. We would like to especially thank CCE and Khun Paul to help us organize this important event. Equitable Education Fund is an independent public fund founded just 4 years ago in Thailand. We are an independently managed public fund supervised directly by the Prime Minister. We're not inside any particular ministry, due mainly because we are found based on the mandate on reform, in education reform, particularly on the equitable education mandate. We need to be independent, yet we don't need to be big in number. In the number of total staff in our office, less than, I think it's 80 staff at the moment, not more than 100. But we serve over 1.3 million children across the country. In the slide that I have, only one slide that I show at the back is the key mandate that we have on our current strategic plan of EEF. There are 4 goals, and all these 4 goals of EEF focus mainly on the equitable side of it. For example, on the learning access, the equitable learning access is crucial, still crucial for Thailand. Although we are in the upper high middle income country, we still have many things to be need to be done in many things to make sure that we can escape this middle income trap and enter the high income status. We still have over millions of children living in poverty, some of them living still outside of the education system. Some of them already enter but drop out. So equitable access is crucial for our mandate. However, after they access the school system, when they can start to learn in the school, the meeting we have today is the second most important agenda that we are up to. We would like to make sure that they have equitable learning outcome. In this area, we still have lots to learn from your experience internationally. And also, those experience, we still need to work closely with our partner locally to make sure that we can bring those experience, data, and research can practically use in Thailand sustainably. And to make sure that we can do so, we start from the knowledge side and we start from the network side. That's why we invite you all. And we thank so much. I think we have the number that you guys come from nearly dozen of countries across the world. I'm not sure some of you still use the old time zone. So in this area, this neighborhood is quite useful for you. If you need a morning run, you live just opposite the biggest park in Bangkok, just across the street. And you also live very close to the main shopping area. We have JJ Market. Now I drift into some of the detour on the tourism side. There's a JJ Market opposite of this area as well. So I just would like you to not to miss it before you go back to your country. And again, these 16 speakers from 15 institutions from 7 countries to join us today. I would like to make sure that what we have started today will continue in Thailand in any forms. Some of them might still in the form of research and pilot in the next few years. But some of them we would like to especially start working closely with our partner at the school level. And in the morning session, you have learned that we have something that we are up to, not only from the Ministry of Education side, but also on the research side that we have been present in the morning session. And especially in the afternoon session, we also have some of the technical work that we are currently working on. After we discuss about this equitable learning outcome, we also start to think that in Thailand, post-compulsory education is already have some thin line that we start to try to find the answer that when the kids finish compulsory schooling, do we still need that to recommend them to stay in school? Is that the only option for them to grow and to unlock their full educational potential and employability? Can we have alternative pathway for them to grow and make the most of the future labor market in Thailand and international labor market? That's why we discuss about alternative education as one of the key strategic direction that we have in Thailand at EEF. And all these three goals won't succeed if we don't have successful system change. When we talked about system change, we don't talk about the macro policy maneuvering, like what Paul mentioned, that I have to go back to the government house after this. But we also talked about area-based work. Area-based, we mean the provincial level, school level, and community level. A lot of innovative stuff came directly from the grassroots initiative, just like what you guys will share in the subsequent session later on. We try to explore the possibility that some of innovation can be cultivated from the grassroots initiative, and some of them can also advocate at the macro level. The beauty of what we are up to at EEF and in Thailand is the combination of this international network, domestic network, research, policy, and also piloting with some high quality research and evaluation. All of this we try to focus ourselves as a catalyst for change. Catalyst that EF cannot do it all alone. The only way we can do is to bring all of us. That's why we come up with this kind of policy that to achieve education for all equitably, we need all for education. And that's what EF stands for. And we hope that this might be the first time you come to Thailand. But we definitely would like to invite you back again in the near future if we have made progress significantly on stuff that we have been discussing about today. And this year we will have an election and a new government. So we will keep you updated about the continuity of this endeavor. And that's exactly why we designed this organization as an political independent organization, because we can continue what really matters for the long term of the Thai student. And now I would like to come back in Thai to make sure that I connect with my Thai colleagues as well. สวัสดีนะครับทุกท่านที่เข้าร่วมการประชุมในวันนี้นะครับกสศต้องขอบพระคุณทุกท่านที่สละเวลามาในวันนี้นะครับทั้งออนไซต์แล้วก็ออนไลน์นะครับการทำงานของกสศเนี่ยจะไม่สามารถประสบความสำเร็จได้เลยนะครับถ้าหากเราขาดความร่วมมือจากทุกท่านและการสนับสนุนจากทุกท่าน วันนี้เราได้รับเกียรติจากทางผู้ทรงคุณวุฒิจากระดับนานาชาตินะครับที่เข้ามาประชุมร่วมกันแต่ที่สำคัญก็คือผู้บริหารท่านทีมงานนะครับของทุกๆองค์กรที่เข้ามาร่วมในวันนี้เนี่ยการประชุมเรื่องของนวัตกรรมการประเมินผลการเรียนรู้กับภารกิจของกสศเนี่ยเป็นเรื่องที่สำคัญจริงๆเพราะว่าถ้าเราสามารถที่จะพาน้องๆเข้าสู่ระบบการศึกษาได้พยายามที่จะส่งเสริมให้เขาก้าวต่อไปในเส้นทางของการศึกษาเป็นรายบุคคลได้เนี่ยเราจำเป็นจะต้องเข้าใจว่าเราจะวัดความสำเร็จของเขาอย่างไงเพราะเด็กเยาวชนทุกคนจำเป็นจะต้องรู้ว่าตัวเขาเนี่ย สามารถทำอะไรได้ดี และตัวเขาเนี่ยสามารถที่จะบรรลุเป้าหมายทางการศึกษาในเรื่องใดได้บ้างในทักษะใดได้บ้างและเขามีอนาคตในการประกอบอาชีพหรืออนาคตในการเป็นส่วนหนึ่งของการพัฒนาประเทศในเรื่องใดในมิติใดหรือในหัวข้ออะไรได้บ้างงั้นการวัดที่สามารถช่วยให้เด็กคุณครูโรงเรียนและผู้ปกครองรวมถึงชุมชนเข้าใจได้ว่าเส้นทางทางการศึกษาของเด็กแต่ละคนเนี่ยจะเดินไปในเส้นทางไหนต่อไปในช่วงชีวิตของเขาไม่ว่าจะเป็นช่วงปฐมวัยช่วงประถมศึกษามัธยมศึกษาหรือสูงกว่าการศึกษาขั้นพื้นฐานเป็นหัวใจสำคัญอย่างยิ่งที่ประเทศไทยจะสามารถที่จะพัฒนาทิศทางการศึกษาของเราให้ออกจากเป็นเครื่องมือสำคัญในการออกจากกับดักรายได้ปานกลางให้ได้เพราะประเทศไทยอาจจะไม่ใช่เป็นประเทศที่มีทรัพยากรธรรมชาติมากที่สุดในโลกแต่ประเทศไทยเรามีคนไทยเรามีเด็กไทยที่ถ้าเราสามารถที่จะสนับสนุนเขาได้เต็มที่เขาย่อมไม่แพ้ใครในโลกถ้าเกิดเราสามารถมีเครื่องมือที่มาจากการพัฒนาเชิงวิชาการเราสามารถที่จะมีเครือข่ายในการทำงานในระดับนานาชาติที่สนับสนุนการทำงานที่เป็นนวัตกรรมในพื้นที่ได้เราเชื่อจริงๆนะครับว่าการทำงานนี้จะช่วยยกระดับการสนับสนุนของคุณครูทุกๆคนที่ตั้งใจอยากจะเห็นสิทธิ์ของตัวเองประสบความสำเร็จในชีวิตสิทธิ์บางคนอาจจะไม่สามารถทำคะแนนหรือว่าทำการประเมินในบางด้านบางเรื่องได้ดีแต่ถ้าเกิดเขาได้เครื่องมือที่เราได้มีการแลกเปลี่ยนการประชุมกันในวันนี้แล้วเขาอาจจะค้นหาตัวเองได้เจอเราอยากจะเห็นเด็กไม่ว่าจะเป็นระดับประถมมัธยมหรือมหาวิทยาลัยดีใจแล้วเดินเข้ามาบอกคุณครูในห้องเรียนว่าเขารู้แล้วหลังจากผลการประเมินนี้เนี่ยเขารู้แล้วเขาอยากเป็นอะไรเขาอยากทำอะไรอนาคตเขาจะเรียนอะไรถ้าเกิดเด็กเหล่านี้รู้ตัวได้เร็วที่สุดแค่ไหนแล้วสามารถทำงานกับคุณครูทำงานกับโรงเรียนนะครับและผู้ปกครองได้ว่าอนาคตของเขาสามารถที่จะเดินไปในทิศทางไหนได้บ้างพวกเราที่กสศเชื่อเป็นอย่างยิ่งว่าประเทศของเราจะมีผู้ที่ประสบความสำเร็จนะครับทางด้านการศึกษาแล้วก็ทางด้านอาชีพต่างๆมากไปกว่านี้อีกเยอะเลยนะครับเพราะฉะนั้นตรงนี้น่าจะเป็นโอกาสสำคัญที่เราได้แลกเปลี่ยนประสบการณ์ได้เรียนรู้หนทางในการทำงานและถ้าเกิดหากกสศสามารถที่จะช่วยสนับสนุนนวัตกรรมการทำงานในด้านต่างๆของคุณครูแล้วก็ผู้บริหารสถานศึกษากับผู้บริหารหน่วยงานต่างๆท่านอาจจะรู้จักกสศในมุมว่าเราทำงานช่วยเหลือเด็กยากจนช่วยเหลือเด็กด้อยโอกาสแต่ผมต้องกราบเรียนนะครับว่าถ้าเกิดโจทย์ในเรื่องของความเหลื่อมล้ำทางด้านโอกาสเราสามารถทำให้เกิดความคืบหน้าได้จนถึงระดับหนึ่งแล้วโจทย์ต่อไปที่กสศให้ความสำคัญอย่างมากคือความเสมอภาคทางการเรียนรู้และการพัฒนาทรัพยากรมนุษย์ครับเพราะว่าประเทศไทยจะไปได้อย่างยั่งยืนในทุกๆมิติถ้าเกิดเรามีทรัพยากรมนุษย์ที่มีคุณภาพแล้วเขาน้องๆเหล่านั้นรู้จักตัวเองแล้วรู้จักอนาคตของตัวเองอนาคตของเขาก็จะเป็นอนาคตของประเทศไทยที่เราทุกคนจะร่วมได้รับประโยชน์แล้วก็ได้เห็นประเทศไทยได้ก้าวออกจากกับดักรายได้ปานกลางได้ในอนาคตเพราะฉะนั้นในงานวันนี้นะครับอยากจะให้ทุกท่านได้มีโอกาสแลกเปลี่ยนสอบถามแล้วก็เราจะมีเน็ตเวิร์กกันด้วยนะครับในการทานอาหารเย็นในวันพรุ่งนี้ด้วยถ้าเกิดท่านไหนเนี่ยสนใจแล้วก็อยากที่จะได้มีโอกาสพูดคุยแลกเปลี่ยนกับวิทยากรผู้ทรงคุณวุฒิสามารถที่จะติดต่อได้หรืออยากที่จะได้ข้อมูลอะไรเพิ่มเติมสามารถติดต่อทีมงานกสศมาได้เลยนะครับเราสามารถที่จะช่วยให้มีการประสานงานตรงนี้ต่อไปได้และหากมีคำแนะนำอย่างไรที่อยากจะให้กสศจัดงานในลักษณะนี้อีกในอนาคตมีอะไรที่จะแนะนำพวกเราต่อไปสามารถที่จะแจ้งทีมงานของเราได้เลยนะครับในโอกาสนี้กสศต้องขอบพระคุณทุกท่านอีกทีที่มาร่วมงานในวันนี้และขอให้ทุกท่านได้ช่วยให้คำแนะนำของเราด้วยนะครับว่าเราจะทำงานในเรื่องนี้ต่อไปได้อย่างยั่งยืนได้อย่างไรบ้างครับในโอกาสนี้ผมในนามกองทุนเพื่อความเสมอภาคทางการศึกษาและก็หน่วยงานภาคีร่วมจัดต้องขอบพระคุณทุกท่านและขอให้บ่ายวันนี้เป็นบ่ายวันที่ได้มีโอกาสที่เรียนรู้อีกทีนึงนะครับขอบคุณครับสวัสดีครับ
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Cryot. And I hope you have a successful time with the Cabinet this afternoon. I'd now like to move forward and to ask Dr. Ricardo Rosas from the Pontifical University of Santiago in Chile to make the next presentation.
Thank you, Paul. Hi, nice to meet you. I'm really lucky to be here with you. I thank CCE and EF for inviting me to this session. I want to show you the test that is being applied here for assessing the outcomes in executive functions of the Thai children. And I want to explain you how and what the test is. How was it constructed? Not exactly. I will show you the test in detail. And if you have enough time, I will also explain you some methodological issues. But I know, you know, as Alice in Wonderland said to the Griffin, no, the Griffin to Alice, we will begin always with the adventures, okay? Because explanations are so dreadful and so boring. So we will use our time in not in explaining, but in showing how does it work, this test. And if we have time left, I will show you all the methodological issues. And if I have no enough time to do that, I will give you the reference of the published test that explain that in detail, okay? So let's begin with that. Let's begin not with the definition, but with an explanation of what we mean when we talk about executive functions. The mainstream model is that of Miyake and Diamond from the 2000, and differentiate three components of the executive functions. The first is the inhibitory control, the second is the working memory, and the third is cognitive flexibility. This is a model that assumes that in the development, the functions, the executive functions are constructed one one after the other, okay? So working memory is constructed over the inhibitory control and the cognitive flexibility over the working memory, but the three components are on about 9-10 years fully developed, okay? And this is the reason why we will see later that with smaller children, we can not see and not differentiate very sharp the three components of the executive functions. We can, in smaller children, only see that if they inhibit or not, or if they have a small working memory span, but the cognitive flexibility is constructed a bit later in the development. I hope Todd will show us today in the afternoon a deeper look on what is creativity and flexibility, okay? Executive functions are understand as the conscious control of emotions, thoughts, and actions, okay? It is supposed that we all learned that in the early childhood. We know exactly that this is not true. We are all, we have all sometimes in our lives a lack of executive control, executive functions, or we lose them when we, for instance, take a glass of wine more than we have to, okay? And then we lose inhibition, for instance, and we can't think correctly, and we have a lot of cognitive flexibility, okay? Executive functions are then well established on about 12 years, but of course, we can being affected them with external issues like alcohol, drugs, or whatever, okay? Stress. Okay, I want to show you the test that we constructed. Yellow-red test is a tablet-based assessment, is a playful assessment test based in the paradigm of invisible assessment through play. It also exists an alternative version of that called stealth assessment, and essentially this this approach develops assessment tools that are invisible for the child that is being assessed. So the child is not aware that he or she is being assessed, and so he reach its maximal potential, because you know exactly when a child suspects that he or she is being assessed, then he becomes anxious, okay? It is designed for children between 6 and 11, and it lasts about 15 to 30 minutes. Okay, the test has 6 tasks. The first one is exactly a copy of Adele Diamond's Hats and Flowers task, and we changed that for cat and dogs because in Spanish the translation hats and flowers sounds very bad. Okay, and so we, Pat Gato Perro, with is cat and dog, and this is the only reason why we changed the name and the content of the test, but it is exactly the same test. And this test consists in 3 different sections. The first one is a congruent phase at the left. When a cat appears on the screen, the child has to press the same side of the screen. If the cat appears on the left side, then the child presses the left side. The incongruent phase is when a dog appears, the child has to press the other side of the screen. So if the dog appears right, the child has to press to the left and vice versa. And the mixed phase, the third one, consists on 32 items where randomly appears the cat or a dog in one of the sides, okay? I want to show you this very
Vamos a jugar
briefly.
6 juegos en el tablet. Gato, perro, tríos, flechas, nexos, granja y moscas. Vamos a jugar primero el juego del gato y el perro. Bienvenido a Gatos y Perros. Vamos a entrar. ¿Ya? En este juego, cada vez que aparezca un gato, tienes que apretar el botón que está al mismo lado que aparece el gato. Recuerda, siempre tienes que fijar tu mirada en la cruz que está al medio. Vamos a practicar. Muy bien. Bien. Bien, apretaste siempre al mismo lado donde está.
Okay, all the tasks have the same format. At the beginning, the evaluator gives the child an example of the task, the child exercises that, and if he commits an error, then the system automatically corrects it. Okay? And so, after that, after being sure that the child has comprehended the task goes on. Okay, the second one is a cognitive flexibility task. This task is based on the idea of the Wisconsin test. Wisconsin test is the mainstream gold standard for assessing cognitive flexibility in adults. Okay, and for children, it's very difficult to do that in the same way because of the complexity of the task. And we invented this test that is, it also consists in 3 phases. The first one, the children has to grasp that the implicit criteria is by color. There are always presented 4 figures, okay? And from the 4 figures, the instruction is that the child has to select 3 that has something in common, okay? In the first phase, the common criteria is color. The second is shape, and the third is size. But the task changed automatically, and the child doesn't informed that the criteria changed. So the child has to find out that suddenly the criteria changed, because if they do the task with the prior criteria, the task will be not good. I will show you that. Okay.
Ahora vamos a jugar el juego de los tríos. En esta prueba siempre se te presentarán 4 figuras. Tienes que seleccionar las 3 figuras que se parezcan en algo o que tengan algo en común. Esta prueba es diferente, ya que tú tendrás que ver cómo se responde. No te podemos dar ejemplos. Recuerda, la única pista que te podemos dar es que de las 4 figuras que van a aparecer, tienes que encontrar las 3 que son parecidas o que tienen algo en común. ¿Estás lista?
Okay. Could you see that? In this part, the child committed an error, and this is a sign that the criteria changed, and so the child has to find out that these criteria changed. It's a very hard task for small children, younger than, let's say, 8 years. It's very hard to find out, okay? Older children begin to find out, but this is in youngest children, this is not very reliable task because it is simply too complex, okay? Okay, then we have arrows. This is a cognitive inhibition task. This is a very classical flankers task. We have always a target screen, the screen at the top, that shows an arrow that is pointing in one direction, okay? And you have 3 alternatives below showing in different directions. The child has always to point out the arrow that shows the same direction as the target one, okay? But when the arrow on the screen is pointing down, the child has to do nothing. Okay, this is a classical inhibition task. Okay, okay. I don't want to show you because we had no so much time. I go ahead.
Vamos
to the
entonces
next
ahora.
task. The next task is an associative pairs task. It's short-term memory, not working memory, but short-term memory. Okay. And then the child has to associate, as you can see there, at the very left you have 3 figures, each associated with a number. The child has to remember the correspondence between each figure and his corresponding number. And after that, as you can see in the second screen, 2 elements are being showed, and the child has to remember which were the numbers that were associated to the figures. Okay, and so the child has to complete that. It begins only with 2 elements and not figure number, but figure associations. It begins very easy and goes more and more complex in the time, okay? I will also not show
Ahora
that
vamos a
because
jugar el
it's...
juego.
Then we have a working memory task. This is a true working memory task. If you are confident with the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, this is exactly the same task, but being showed in another format, okay? And so we have 2 different modalities for this task, one auditory and one visual. Basically, the task consists in associating, in remembering animals, sounds that are being presented in a given order, and the child has to remember them and then give them in the reverse order. Okay, I will show you that. Uh-oh. Sorry for that. Okay. I don't know what has happened. Computers can be crazy also.
Ahora vamos a jugar el juego de las moscas.
No, it's one
Mira.
before. I don't know what happened.
Ahora vamos a jugar al juego
Okay.
de la granja. Vamos a conocer a todos los animales que viven en esta granja. Aprieta cada animal para escuchar su sonido. Alguien encerró a los animales en el granero. Los tenemos que liberar. Ahora escucharás dos animales. Cuando suene la campana, los vamos a tocar al revés de como los escuchaste. Primero lo voy a hacer yo y después lo vas a hacer tú. Acabamos de escuchar dos sonidos de animales. Primero escuchamos un chancho y después escuchamos un gato. Como ya sonó la campana, los voy a tocar al revés de como los escuchamos. Entonces toco primero el gato y después el chancho. Muy bien, los liberamos. Ahora libéralos tú.
Okay, this is the rational of the task, and after that, the visual part, the visual section is the same, but visually, not auditive. Okay, and then the sixth task is the behavioral innovation task, and this task consists basically in we try to resemble the marshmallow task. Okay, you know the classical marshmallow task. This was a child that was explained and give a marshmallow and explained, if you don't eat the marshmallow, and I go outside the room, and you don't eat the marshmallow, I will give you another. Okay, it was a very cruel task. Okay, and then the experimenter went outside, waited for 5 minutes, came back, and if the child could resist the temptation, he received another marshmallow. And he was filmed, and you can see these videos in YouTube, and they are really funny because the children used all kinds of strategies to not eat the marshmallows. Okay. The problem with the marshmallow task is that it is impossible to do today because we can't left alone a child in a room. So we figured out how we can resemble this task, and we found this task. This is the flies task. Okay, and then the child can smash flies. Children love this task. Okay. They really love to kill these flies because of the sound. Also, you will hear the sound after that. And we had to strongly recommend all the evaluators all over the world that we are working with to use this task as the latest one. Because if you use this task as the first one, then the children doesn't want to play the rest of the test. You know, they will remain here. I will show you the task. It has two conditions. At the beginning, they learned to smash the flies, and then they are instructed. You have a traffic light that is turned green or red, and the child can smash flies only when the light turns green. Okay, and when it turns red, he has to. Okay. We will see that.
Ahora vamos a jugar el juego de las moscas. Mira, van a empezar a volar unas moscas. Aplástalas lo más rápido que puedas. Fíjate, ahora hay un semáforo. Cuando esté en verde, puedes aplastar las moscas. Mira, se prendió la luz roja. Ahora no debes aplastar las moscas. Muy bien. Ahora vamos a practicar.
this is a very good inhibited girl. You can see? Okay, but this is an exceptional girl. Yeah, almost all the children and mainly the youngest children, they simply ignore the red light, you know, this because they are having so much fun in the task that they simply go ahead with the task. Okay, so I will then show you some. I have some time left, 9 minutes. So until I will show you these results. We have 245 children. Okay. Our standardization sample consists on 245 children divided in high and low SES, and as you can see in 7 different grades, although the 6th grade has only 7 children, mainly the same amount of girls and boys. The yellow-red tests has correspondence with the mainstream gold standards in this area. Inhibition, the gold standards are the flankers task, working memory, the digit span of the WISC-5, and cognitive flexibility by the modified card sort test for children, and similarities of the WISC-5. Okay. The reliability and validity evidence of the test is pretty good. In our sample, as you can see, almost all of the task has more than 0.8 in Cronbach's alpha, and in Fly's task has 0.82 in Pearson's error. These are pretty good reliabilities. One criteria of validity is also the growth with age. Almost all of the 6 has also very stable and consistent growth with age, with the exception made by Farm that we have there in the last 3 years, not such a good result, but anyway, the differences in all the tasks with ANOVA are all very and strong significantly, as you can see there. The correlations between the yellow-red subtest and their corresponding gold standards are also pretty good, all very significant. As you can see in the first column are the yellow-red subtest, and the second, the gold standard reference. We tested all the children with all the yellow-red and also the gold standard tests, and you can see the correlations, which are all significant. And we also, in the last column, we have what is known as discriminant validity. We correlated all the tests with the test that is theoretically supposed not to correlate with the test, and you can see that the correlations are really insignificant. And this test is one test of the TRF, that is a social adaptation, a school adaptation test. Okay. And the confirmatory factor analysis, we proposed 2 models for the confirmatory factor analysis. The first model, three different models. Not sorry for that. We have a lot of different models. The model 1, in the factor 1, it's supposed to have inhibition. In the factor 2, working memory, and the factor 3, cognitive flexibility. This is the standard model that we had expected if all in the world were perfect, but of course it is not, and therefore we postulate different models. And as you can see, and T will later show something similar, in our data we could not demonstrate that the executive functions are divided in the 3 factors that are postulated by Miyake and Diamond. We only could find 2 factors, okay? We can't, in our data, we cannot separate flexibility and this is probably due because of the age of our sample, okay? We are right now collecting more data with older children, but because we are pretty well convinced that if we have more children until, let's say, 14 years, we could separate the three factors, okay? Because we have good reasons for thinking that in other samples we could do that, but in this sample we couldn't do that. Okay, in our sample we could find the following. When we take the whole sample, we can find only one executing functions factor, and this factor is mainly explained by the inhibition. Okay, we can say that the main factor in when you take all the sample, the main factor of executive functions is inhibition. Okay, both cognitive and behavioral. Okay, but when we separate the sample in kindergarten and fifth grade and in second to sixth grade, we found another model. In kindergarten and first grade, we could replicate the same. That is, inhibition explains the most variants of executive functions, but in the older children, we could find two factors. And these factors are clearly inhibition, as you can see, as arrows, flies, cat, dog, and triads, and a working memory factor, that is farm and binding. Okay? You will see that in depth with T's results in Thailand. He has a pretty larger sample than we, so I think his results are more stable and more valid, I think, than ours. Okay. Okay, and about yellow-red is being used internationally very broadly right now. You have the map shows three different colors. The green color shows countries where data are being collected in China, Thailand, Norway, Poland, Hungary, Brazil. The red ones shows where they are being standardized in Chile and in Germany with Hogrife publisher right now, and the black ones where it is right now where there exists in translation. Okay, we are looking for international partners, so the test is for research purposes totally free, and you can only contact us and you can use it as you want, okay? We are really very happy to have a test that really works and works very well, and we are also very happy that it is being used in this very relevant Thai project, and I want to especially thanks Fum and Paul and T for using it here for these purposes. Okay, I have 1 minute left, but I give the microphone to T, and he continues with these results. T, come here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ricardo. Of course, I mean, the most is to thank you for allowing us to use these tools. It's very fun to do it, and I went to the field and see the kid playing. It's quite nice, and so I'm not gonna tell you how to construct this because I'm not a psychologist and I don't know how to do it. I know how to implement it. So I'm an economist and more like work in the field, collecting data, and would like to use this as part of our bigger project is to understand how we build human capital. Okay, so by seeing EFs or executive functions, would be part of human capital or skills that we would like to build to, I mean, not just young kids, but we want to build at a young age, and then they have that when they grow up and then be in the labor market. So anyway, I start with English, but I will turn to Thai because I might be more fluent in Thai. Hope you will, but you can raise any question in English, and I will respond in English when you ask in English. ครับสวัสดีนะครับก็วันนี้ขอบคุณพอขอบคุณภูมิขอบคุณกสศนะครับขอบคุณริคาร์โดที่ให้ได้มีส่วนร่วมในงานนี้จริงๆก็รู้สึกดีใจมากเพราะว่าจริงๆผมว่างานนี้สำหรับผมมันพยายามบอกอะไรนะครับมันเหมือนกับเทอร์โมมิเตอร์คือเรากำลังคุยกันเรื่องเทอร์โมมิเตอร์แล้วจริงๆเวลาเราพูดถึงเทอร์โมมิเตอร์จริงๆมันมีโค้ดอันหนึ่งที่สำคัญมากที่ผมใช้อยู่เสมอในที่ทำงานของผมก็คือ from Lord Kelvin if you cannot measure it you cannot improve it ผมว่าจริงๆธีมสำหรับผมวันนี้ก็คือว่าเรามาคุยกันว่าเราจะวัดเอาคำในการศึกษายังไงเพราะว่าถ้าเราไม่วัดนะครับเราก็เหมือนคนตาบอดภาษาไทยเราเรียกว่าตาบอดคลำช้างนะครับก็หวังว่าการที่เราวัดได้ดีขึ้นอันนี้ก็เป็นหนึ่งเครื่องมือที่วันนี้จะได้มานั่งคุยกันนะครับคือจะได้มาคุยว่ามันทำอะไรได้บ้างแน่นอนครับเครื่องมือวัดไม่มีอะไรสมบูรณ์แบบแต่ว่าเราก็ต้องเข้าใจมันแล้วเราก็ต้องเรียนรู้ว่ามันใช้อะไรได้บ้างมีจุดอ่อนอะไรมีจุดแข็งอะไรและที่สำคัญถ้าเรามองในเชิงนโยบายมันต้องทำ large scale ได้นะครับเพราะงานนี้ที่ผมจะพูดถึงก็คือประสบการณ์ที่ได้เอาเครื่องมือของ Ricardo เนี่ยนะครับ Yellow Red เนี่ยมาใช้ในเมืองไทยนะครับ Oops okay doesn't corroborate I don't know where to point oh okay now sorry okay so ที่ผ่านมานะครับประมาณ1 เดือนที่ผ่านมาเราก็ได้เอาเครื่องมือนี้ไปทดลองใช้ในภาคอีสานนะครับในจังหวัดมหาสารคามแล้วก็กาฬสินธุ์ถามว่าทำไมที่นั่นนะครับผมขอเล่านิดนึงนะครับก็คือว่าพอดีประมาณ 7-8 ปีที่ผ่านมาแล้วที่สถาบันวิจัยของเราได้เก็บข้อมูลเด็กตั้งแต่เด็กยังอายุประมาณ2 ขวบแล้วเราก็ follow เด็กกลุ่มเดิมๆเป็น longitudinal data นะก็คือตามเด็กคนเดิมๆเนี่ยมา 7-8 ปีแล้วเพราะเรารู้ว่าชีวิตเขาเป็นยังไงบ้างระดับหนึ่งนะครับไม่ใช่ทั้งหมดแต่ก็คิดว่าดีพอสมควรนะครับเรากลับไปถามผู้ปกครองทุกๆปีตามไปดูเขาที่โรงเรียนตามไปทดสอบนู่นนี่นั่นนี่ก็จะเป็นอีกอันหนึ่งที่เราทดสอบเพราะเราจะมีความเข้าใจว่าที่ผ่านมาเขาเป็นยังไงอย่างเช่นเขาเล่นมือถือเยอะไหมนะครับเขามีเขาเรียกว่าอะไรพ่อแม่อยู่บ้านด้วยไหมนะครับหรือพ่อแม่ไปทำงานต่างจังหวัดนะครับทรัพย์สินของที่บ้านเป็นยังไงนะฐานะดีฐานะไม่ดีเรามีข้อมูลที่ค่อนข้างเยอะพอสมควรแต่วันนี้อาจจะไม่ได้โชว์ทั้งหมดนะแต่ว่าเหตุผลก็คือว่านั่นคือความตั้งใจก็คือเราอยากจะเก็บข้อมูลพวกนี้แล้วก็เรียนรู้ว่าปัจจัยต่างๆที่มันเกิดขึ้นในชีวิตของเด็กเนี่ยมันจะมีผลยังไงต่อทักษะที่เขาจะมีเมื่อเขาโตมาเราสนใจเรื่อง EF ถูกไหมครับในสังคมไทยพูดถึงมากคำถามคือแล้วอะไรมันสร้าง EF ผมว่าวันนี้เราพูดเรื่องเทอร์โมมิเตอร์แต่เราหวังว่าเทอร์โมมิเตอร์ที่เรามีเนี่ยถ้ามันวัดได้ดีมันจะเริ่มกลับไปตอบคำถามที่อาจจะยิ่งสำคัญกว่าก็คือทำอะไรทำอย่างไรผลการวัดออกมามันถึงจะดีนะครับไม่ใช่การติวข้อสอบนะครับคนละเรื่องกันผมเข้าใจว่าคนไม่ค่อยชอบ O-NET เพราะมันเกิดการติวข้อสอบ O-NET ไม่ใช่ยาพิษนะครับมันก็คือเทอร์โมมิเตอร์อันหนึ่งเทอร์โมมิเตอร์ทุกอันก็มีเออร์เรอร์ไม่บ้างเป็นธรรมดาแต่ว่าใช้ให้มันเป็นประโยชน์นะครับแต่ว่าคำถามก็คือเราวัดมันยังไงนะครับแล้ววัดได้ไหมนะเพราะสิ่งที่เราอยากจะทำในงานนี้ก็คือเราจะลองไปวัดดูในพื้นที่ที่เป็นชนบทนะครับโรงเรียนเนี่ยน่าจะจำนวน60-70คือเป็น100โรงเรียนเลยนะครับเพราะโรงเรียนหนึ่งมีกลุ่มตัวอย่างเราอยู่ประมาณ5 คนก็มี3 คนก็มี10 คนก็มีนะครับตอนนี้เรามีข้อมูลอยู่ประมาณ 1,000 เกือบ 1,200 คนเพราะโรงเรียนที่เราไปเก็บข้อมูลเนี่ยเป็นเกือบ100โรงเรียนนะครับข่าวดีก็คือทำได้จริงๆนะครับโชคดีเราได้รับบริจาคแท็บเล็ตเล็กๆเป็นแท็บเล็ตเก่าที่เทิร์นออกมาจากธนาคารออมสินนะครับมีบริษัทที่เขาดูแลเขาเอามาบริจาคเราก็เลยได้เอาแท็บเล็ตนี้ไปเทสนะครับก็เลยสามารถทำได้และที่สำคัญแอปตัวนี้ผมพูดในมุมของ operation นะครับคืออันนี้อาจจะไม่ใช่เรื่องใหญ่สำหรับคนที่ทำแอปเป็นแต่เป็นเรื่องใหญ่สำหรับคนทำงานวิจัยอย่างผมก็คือไม่ได้ต้องการอินเทอร์เน็ตในตอนที่เทสพูดง่ายๆโรงเรียนนั้นอาจจะสัญญาณอินเทอร์เน็ตไม่ดีก็ไม่เป็นไรนะครับนี่คือข่าวดีเลยสำหรับการทำงานในภาคสนามจริงๆมันเป็นแอปที่มันจะเก็บไว้ในบนเครื่องแล้วเมื่อเครื่องนี้ไปเจออินเทอร์เน็ตเมื่อไหร่ค่อยอัปโหลดซึ่งอันนี้ดีมากๆและมีประโยชน์มากนะครับเพราะฉะนั้นเราก็เลยสามารถเก็บข้อมูลได้เยอะพอสมควรนะครับ เมื่อกี้เขาเก็บได้200ทำไมเราเก็บได้1,200นะครับเพราะริคาร์โดตื่นเต้นมากนะครับนี่คือภาพบรรยากาศในการเก็บนะครับก็อันนี้เราก็ follow recommendation ของริคาร์โดคือถ้าเป็นเด็กโตหน่อยนะครับตั้งแต่ประมาณป.3 ขึ้นไปป.2 ป.3 เราจะเป็นกลุ่มใหญ่หน่อยประมาณ5คนนะเพื่อประหยัดเวลาคือแน่นอนครับถ้าเทสเยอะเท่าไหร่มันก็ประหยัดทรัพยากรเท่านั้นแต่ข้อเสียคือเกมแบบนี้มันไม่สามารถเทสได้ขนาดแบบเดียวกับ ONET หรือ NT ที่คุณเทสห้องหนึ่ง30 คนทีเดียวคนคุมคนเดียวก็ได้นะครับอันนี้ยังไงก็ยังต้องการดูแลการสื่อสารการอธิบายไม่มากแต่ก็ยังต้องดูแลเพราะฉะนั้น at max ตอนนี้เราเทสได้ทีละ5คนนะครับจริงๆเข้าใจว่า6คนก็เป็นไปได้แต่ว่าด้วยตัวอย่างที่เรามีเราเทส maximum ที่สุดคือกลุ่มละ5คนแต่ถ้าเด็กเล็กกว่านั้นหน่อยเราอาจจะเทสทีละ2คนนะครับหรือ3คนแล้วแต่กรณีแต่ว่าหลักๆคือประมาณ2คนนะครับก็จะเห็นรูปภาพนะครับเราก็ไปเทสนะครับแล้วก็มีบรรยากาศที่แตกต่างกันนะครับบางโรงเรียนก็เราก็เทสในห้องเรียนบางโรงเรียนก็เทสในโรงอาหารหลายคนก็คงตั้งคำถามว่าเฮ้ยแล้วผลมันจะเป็นยังไงแน่นอนครับมีเออร์เรอร์แน่นอนแต่เรานี่คือสภาพความจริงคำถามคือเราจะจัดการกับมันยังไงนะครับแล้ววิธีการเทสของเราก็คือเมื่อกี้คุณคือตัวแอปถูกไหมครับแต่แอปเองก็ต้องอธิบายข่าวดีของแอปนี้ก็คือเราไม่ต้องใช้ specialist คือไม่ต้องใช้คนที่จบปริญญาโทจบปริญญาเอกเท่านั้นที่ไปนั่งเทสเด็กนะครับเป็นจบปริญญาตรีอธิบายกับเด็กได้คุยกับเด็กแล้วยิ้มแย้มแจ่มใสทำได้เราทำอะไรเพิ่มเติมนิดหน่อยคือเราก็ทำเว็บแอปพลิเคชันเป็น instruction นะครับให้คนที่ไปเทสเนี่ยเปิดแล้วก็อธิบายให้กับเด็กเป็นสเต็ปและในเว็บแอปพลิเคชันเนี่ยเพื่อความสนุกนะนี้ไม่ได้บอกริคาร์โดไว้ก่อนแต่ว่าผมก็ทำเพิ่มก็คือเราก็เดี๋ยวนี้มันมีแอปในโทรศัพท์ที่วัด noise นะครับทุกคนเวลาวัดเด็กจะกังวลเรื่องเสียงมากๆนะเพราะเราก็อยากรู้ว่าเสียงมันมีผลแค่ไหนนะก็เดี๋ยวเราจะมาดูผลทีหลังนะครับแต่ว่าอันนี้ก็วัดเพิ่มได้ไม่ยากนะเราก็วัด noise วัดตั้งแต่ค่าเฉลี่ยระหว่างช่วงเทสหรือสูงสุดแล้วก็ต่ำสุดอันนี้เพื่อจะมาดูว่ามันเราควรจะกังวลแค่ไหนในการวัดนะครับเพราะบางอันอาจจะต้องกังวลบางอันอาจจะไม่จำเป็นนะครับทีนี้ก็ถึงเวลาที่อาจจะไม่สนุกนักก็มาดูผลแล้วกันนะครับว่าที่วัดมาผมอันนี้ยังแบบเพิ่งสดร้อนมากนะครับอย่าเพิ่งถือเป็นตุเป็นตะมากก็ยังข้อมูลเพิ่งเข้ามารวมแล้วไม่อันนี้คือกลุ่มตัวอย่างของเรานะฮะช่วงอายุใกล้เคียงกับของริคาร์โดแต่ว่าส่วนใหญ่เด็กของเราจะอยู่ที่ตั้งประมาณ8 ถึง 12 ขวบเพราะ7 ขวบกับ13 ขวบอย่าไปเชื่อมากเพราะกลุ่มตัวอย่างกระจึงเดียวนะครับมีแบบไม่กี่คนนะครับไม่ถึง10 คนด้วยซ้ำในแต่ละกลุ่มส่วนใหญ่เด็กของเราจะอยู่ในช่วง8 ถึง 12นะครับนี่คือ arrow ก็คล้ายๆกับที่ริคาร์โดโชว์นะครับ13นี่ลืมมันไปก็ได้นะครับเพราะว่าอันขวาสุดนี่มันมีกลุ่มตัวอย่างแค่3 คนนะครับมันไม่แล้วแต่มันจะเกิดอะไรขึ้นแต่สิ่งที่เห็นก็คือมันเพิ่มตามอายุนะครับแล้วก็เริ่มค่อยๆลาดนะครับค่อยๆนิ่งน่าจะคล้ายๆกับที่ริคาร์โดบอกคือพอถึงจุดหนึ่ง EF มันก็จะไม่ได้พัฒนาต่อแล้วแต่ว่ามันพัฒนานะแต่มันจะพัฒนาน้อยลงเรื่อยๆนะครับผมว่านี่ก็เป็นอีกอันหนึ่งที่เราคงต้องค้นหาแล้วก็ตอบกันว่าแล้วมันจบที่ไหนมันจบเมื่อไหร่ซึ่งจะนำไปสู่แนวทางในการเสริมสร้าง EF ก็คือว่าแล้วถ้าเราจะสร้าง EF เราต้องรีบขนาดไหนนะบางอย่างก็ต้องรีบบางอย่างก็ไม่ต้องรีบนะเพราะถ้าเรารีบทุกอย่างทำอะไรไม่ได้เลยมันต้องเลือกนะครับก็หวังว่าข้อมูลและความรู้เหล่านี้จะช่วยให้เราเลือกได้ดีขึ้นflies นะครับเมื่อกี้ที่เป็นแมลงนะครับจุดก็ใกล้เคียงนะครับอาจจะแล้วก็เริ่มลาดเช่นเดียวกันนะครับตัวที่อาจจะมีประหลาดหน่อยสำหรับเราซึ่งอันนี้ยังไม่มีคำตอบนะครับก็คือ binding จริงๆยากมากนะครับ binding ใครผู้ใหญ่ก็ลองทำได้แล้วจะรู้ว่าจริงๆก็ไม่ง่ายเลยที่จะทำนะต้องจำทั้งรูปสัตว์จำทั้งตัวเลขเอามาประกบกันเพราะฉะนั้นอาจจะไม่แปลกเลยที่มันอาจจะยังไม่ได้แปลตามอายุนะครับแต่อันนี้ยังไม่แน่ใจว่ามันเกิดอะไรขึ้นนะครับแต่ว่าอันนี้เป็นอันเดียวที่ไม่ได้เปลี่ยนแปลงตามอายุอย่างที่เราคาดหวังนะครับฟาร์มนะครับเมื่อกี้ที่เป็นเสียงสัตว์เป็นรูปสัตว์นะครับก็เป็นไปตามที่เราคาดหวังก็คือเพิ่มขึ้นตามอายุนะครับก็ triad อันนี้ก็ไม่แปลกก็เพิ่มแต่ก็เพิ่มน้อยหน่อยเพราะมันอันนี้ก็ยากนะครับเด็กไทยจริงๆต้องบอกเลย binding กับ triad เนี่ยกับเกมที่ยากๆเนี่ยเด็กเรายังทำไม่ค่อยได้นะอันนี้ไม่รู้ว่าเป็นเพราะอะไรนะครับแต่ว่าก็เพิ่มเหมือนกันแต่เพิ่มน้อย นะครับก็เดี๋ยวคงต้องศึกษาต่อนะครับก็นี่คือ Cat Dog Cat Dog ก็เป็นเกมที่ลึกๆ inhibition ก็คือการหยุดยับยั้งชั่งใจของเราไม่ได้แย่นะครับคือก็เป็นไปตามทฤษฎีที่บอกก็คือมันค่อยๆเพิ่มแล้วก็เพิ่มสูงขึ้นตามอายุอีกอันหนึ่งที่เราทำก็คือถามคำถามคล้ายๆกับที่ริคาร์โดถามก็คือว่าแล้วEF เนี่ยมีกี่ dimension ทำไมเราอยากถามนะครับคือจริงๆมันมีคำถามที่ผมว่ากว้างกว่านั้นก็คือว่าทุกคนรู้จัก IQ มันถึงจุดหนึ่งทุกคนพอเราค้นพบ IQ จริงๆก็เป็นความสำเร็จอันยิ่งใหญ่แล้วก็ถึงขั้นเกิดความเข้าใจว่าความฉลาดในวัดอย่างเดียวมีอยู่อย่างเดียวนั่นแหละที่เรียกว่า IQ นะครับไม่มี dimension อื่นแล้วไม่ต้องสนใจอย่างอื่น EF น่าจะเป็น challenge ที่สำคัญอันหนึ่งของ IQ คือว่ามันจริงๆมันอาจจะมีหลาย dimension เพราะมันก็เลยเกิดคำถามว่าเฮ้ยเราอยากจะรู้ว่าจริงๆมันมีหลาย dimension จริงไหมนะครับเพราะว่าคือความจริงนี่มันสำคัญมากเพราะถ้ามันมี1 dimension เราจะรู้ว่าเราจะพยายามพัฒนาอะไรถ้ามันมีหลาย dimension มันก็เป็นความท้าทายแต่อย่างน้อยมันเป็นข้อเท็จจริงการเรียนการสอนหลักสูตรวิธีการจะได้ปรับตัวให้ถูกต้องนะครับจะได้รู้ว่าเวลาเราพัฒนาเราพยายามพัฒนาอะไรบ้างเพราะฉะนั้นมันก็เลยเป็นคำถามหลายคนบอกโหสถิติทำเพื่ออะไรไม่มีอะไรครับก็เหมือนกับอย่างที่ผมบอกก็คือกำลังหาเทอร์โมมิเตอร์พูดง่ายๆเทอร์โมมิเตอร์เรามีกี่มันจะต้องมีกี่แบบนะครับแท่งเดียวพอไหมนะครับผลสุดท้ายก็อาจจะพบว่ามันต้องมีหลายแบบนะครับเราทำอะไรนะครับเราก็ทำคล้ายๆริคาร์โดเลยก็คือว่าถามคำถามง่ายๆว่าเราเทสมาทั้งหมด6อันมีคะแนน6แบบนะจริงๆคะแนนมีมากกว่านี้แต่ว่าเดี๋ยวยังไม่ได้วิเคราะห์ละเอียดเดี๋ยวต้องทำงานร่วมกับริคาร์โดนะครับแต่เอาแบบคะแนนที่มีอยู่ก่อนมี6แบบเรามี6เกมเราก็ตั้งคำถามง่ายๆว่าแบบที่1อย่างที่ริคาร์โดพยายามตั้งใจคือมันน่าจะมี3แฟกเตอร์ไหมนะครับจับเลย2 2 2นะครับก็คือว่ามี inhibition มี working memory มี cognitive flexibility ไหมเดี๋ยวเราจะเทสกันทางสถิตินะไม่มีอะไรเรายังไม่รู้จะทำวิธีอื่นพูดง่ายๆเราจะดูแค่ว่ามันพอไปได้ไหมในเชิงสถิติแบบที่2หรือมันอาจจะมีแค่2หรือเปล่านะครับแบบ2ของผมเนี่ยผมจะแบ่งเป็น3 นะครับเดี๋ยวจะเห็นในรูปนะผมจะไม่เสียเวลาอธิบายตรงนี้อีกอันที่3มี2เหมือนกันแต่ผมจะโยนอันหนึ่งทิ้งเนื่องจากเวลาดูข้อมูลแล้วมันไม่ค่อยไปกับเพื่อนเท่าไหร่คือ triad เพราะเวลามี2เนี่ยราวกับว่าสิ่งที่ไม่ค่อยเจอในข้อมูลก็คือ cognitive flexibility เพราะจะลองดูได้ว่าโยนใน triad ซึ่งพยายามที่จะวัด cognitive flexibility ออกไปเลยเหลือแค่5 results นะครับเหลือแค่5อันจับคู่จับกลุ่มใหม่เนี่ยมันดีกว่าไหมนะครับแล้วก็อันที่4หรืออาจจะไม่ใช่จริงๆ EF ก็ไม่ได้ต่างกับ IQ หรอกมันมีอันเดียวนั่นแหละนะครับมัน universal มันมีอันเดียวนะครับมันมี the EF หรือเปล่านะครับอย่างน้อยภายใน6เกมนี้นะครับอันที่5ก็มีอันเดียวเหมือนกันแต่โยน triad ทิ้งนะเพราะ triad จะสร้างปัญหาก็ได้เพราะมันยากมากนะครับก็อันนี้คือผลนะครับอันนี้เป็นตัวเลขทั้งนั้นเลยแต่ว่าเอาง่ายๆนะครับคอลัมน์แรกเนี่ยนะครับเวลาทำเนี่ยเราอยากจะให้มันน้อยๆนะครับถ้ามันเยอะไม่ดีนะครับเอาง่ายๆนะครับอธิบายง่ายๆตัวนี้น้อยดีแถวที่2ไอ้คอลัมน์ที่2เยอะดีนะครับเพราะบอกว่ามันแม่นนะครับมันตรงกันข้ามกันอันที่3ก็เยอะดีอันที่4ก็น้อยดีนะครับผมก็เลยระบายสีอย่างนี้ว่าสีน้ำเงินนี่คือกลุ่ม3กลุ่มแรกเนี่ยจริงๆดูดีหมดเลยซึ่งแน่นอนนะกลุ่มตัวอย่างเรา1,200นะครับเยอะกว่าของริคาร์โดมากเพราะจริงก็ช่วยได้เยอะนะครับเพราะในแง่ของสถิติเนี่ยทั้ง3อันเนี่ยจริงๆถามว่าผ่านในเชิงสถิติก็ผ่านหมดอันไหนดีที่สุดนะครับก็อาจจะเป็นอันที่2แต่มันก็นิดๆหน่อยๆนะครับเพราะฉะนั้นหลังจากนี้ไปผมจะใช้อันที่มี3อันแล้วกันเพราะว่าเรารู้สึกว่าเราอยากได้3อันนะแต่เดี๋ยวมาดูผลเร็วๆนิดนึงก็ได้นะครับโอเคอันนั้นมันมาจากมันก็นะครับอันนี้เราจับกลุ่มแบบนี้นะครับจับกลุ่มโดยที่ให้ arrow กับ flies เนี่ยเป็นกลุ่มเดียวกัน capture สิ่งที่เรียกว่า inhibitory ก็คือการยับยั้งชั่งใจแล้วก็ให้ binding กับ farm เนี่ย capture สิ่งที่เรียกว่า working memory แล้วที่เหลือก็คือ triads กับ cat dog เนี่ย capture สิ่งที่เรียกว่า cognitive flexibility ก็โมเดลก็รันได้ดีนะครับสังเกตนิดนึงนะครับอันนี้คือ correlation ระหว่าง factor นะครับโมเดลมันบอกได้ว่า EF แต่ละอันมันไปด้วยกันแค่ไหนในมุมหนึ่งของเด็กไทยเนี่ย EF ของแต่ละอันก็ไปด้วยกันเยอะมากนะครับคือมันเต็มสูงสุดคือ1อะไรที่ใกล้1นี่คือแบบโอ้โหแทบจะเป็นอันเดียวกันนะก็อาจจะยังแยกไม่ออกมากนักระหว่าง inhibitory กับ cognitive flexibility แต่ว่า working memory ก็ต่างอยู่ระดับหนึ่งนะครับซึ่งมันก็เลยอาจจะเป็นว่าอันนี้พอเราเอาเหลือแค่2 factor นะครับมันก็เลยยังดูดีอยู่เพราะว่า cognitive flexibility ยังแยกไม่ค่อยออกกับ inhibitory นะครับพอและยิ่งถ้าเราโยนtriad ออกนะครับก็โดยรวมก็คือว่ายังไงก็ตามจะ2หรือ3สำหรับข้อมูลที่เราเก็บมา 1,200 กว่าคนเนี่ยอย่างน้อยสำหรับเด็กไทยเราค่อนข้างมีแนวโน้มที่จะเชื่อว่า executive function ที่เราพบในเด็กผ่านการทดสอบแบบนี้เนี่ยมีหลายมิตินะครับอย่างน้อยไม่2ก็3มิติหลักๆนะครับไม่ใช่มิติเดียวแน่นอนนะครับเพราะฉะนั้นเวลาที่เราจะ analyze หรือเวลาที่เราจะพยายามที่จะพัฒนา executive function เราต้องให้ความสำคัญในการที่มันมีหลายมิตินะครับทีนี้ผมก็จะชวนมาดูอีกนิดหน่อยในฐานะที่ข้อมูลที่ผมมีเนี่ยนะครับมันก็คิดว่ามีข้อดีอีกอย่างนึงก็คือเรามีข้อมูลพื้นฐานเราไม่ใช่แค่เทสเด็กอย่างเดียวนะครับเราเก็บข้อมูลเด็กมาตั้งเยอะนะครับเราก็เอาผลการทดสอบเนี่ยที่ทำเป็น3 factor เนี่ยนะครับเรา run factor เสร็จแล้วก็ predict factor มานะครับเป็นเรียกมันว่า score ของ EF แล้วเราก็ลองไป run regression เพื่อจะดู correlation ว่ามันพูดง่ายๆ EF ของเด็กแต่ละคนเนี่ยสัมพันธ์กับอะไรสัมพันธ์กับปัจจัยอะไรบ้างเท่าที่เราจะมีข้อมูลณปัจจุบันนะครับแถวแรกนะครับอย่างที่เห็นก็คือที่ผมระบายสีเหลืองให้ดูนี่คือตัวแปรที่มันมีผลอย่างมีนัยสำคัญแบบสม่ำเสมอเลยไม่ว่าเราจะทำอะไรก็ตามมันก็ยังมีนัยสำคัญทางสถิตินะครับซึ่งตัวแรกก็คือ wealth วัดอะไรวัด socio-economic status หรือว่าฐานะคือพูดง่ายๆ wealth เยอะก็คือรวยกว่านะครับ wealth น้อยก็คือจนกว่าคือพูดง่ายๆก็หลายคนก็บอกไม่บอกก็รู้ก็คือแต่มันก็เป็นการยืนยันว่าเด็กที่มาจากครอบครัวที่มีฐานะดีกว่าก็จะมี EF ที่สูงกว่านะครับก็ด้วยเหตุผลนานาประการนะครับนี่ยังไม่ได้ตอบเหตุผลนะครับบอกแค่ว่ามันมีผลคือฐานะมีผลนะครับซึ่งก็มี2ประโยชน์2ด้านที่1คือก็อาจจะเป็นการช่วยยืนยันได้ว่า EF ที่เราวัดมาเนี่ยน่าจะมีความหมายระดับหนึ่งเพราะมันสัมพันธ์กับตัวแปรที่มันควรจะสัมพันธ์นะครับอันที่2ซึ่งผมว่าก็น่าสนใจคือข้อมูลนี้เราเก็บเวลาที่เด็กใช้อินเทอร์เน็ตอันนี้ไม่ได้ส่งเสริมให้เด็กไปใช้อินเทอร์เน็ตนะครับแต่บอกว่าผลของการทดสอบเนี่ยเด็กที่ใช้อินเทอร์เน็ตเยอะกว่ามีแนวโน้มที่จะมีผลคะแนนดีกว่าซึ่งอาจจะเป็นเพราะว่าเด็ก practice นะครับคือทุกเครื่องมือทุกเทอร์โมมิเตอร์ที่เรามีมันมีประเด็นของมันไม่ได้บอกว่ามันวัด EF ไม่ได้แต่มันบอกว่าสิ่งที่วัดมาเนี่ยมันอาจจะมีส่วนที่มันมาจากการที่เขาเล่นเกมมากกว่าเพราะเขาก็เชี่ยวชาญกว่าซึ่งอาจจะไม่แปลกนะครับแต่เราในฐานะนักวิจัยก็คือเพียงต้องเข้าใจมันแล้วก็รู้ว่าเราจะจัดการกับมันอย่างไรนะข้อดีก็คือเรามีข้อมูลตัวนี้อยู่นะครับอีกอันนึงก็คือเราโชคดีกว่านั้นก็คือว่าก่อนหน้านี้ก่อนโควิดนะครับปีก่อนที่จะมีโควิดที่จะมีการปิดเรียนใหญ่ในประเทศไทยน่าจะเป็นปีแรกของโควิดนะก่อนที่จะปิดยาวในปี 2021นะในปี 2020 เราได้ไปทดสอบเด็กเราไม่รู้จักริคาร์โดเพราะไม่ได้ใช้เครื่องมือชุดนี้เราทดสอบอะไรที่เบสิกกว่านั้นเราเรียกว่า digit span memory เราก็ตัวเลขให้เด็กดูนะครับแล้วก็ให้เด็กดูตัวเลข3ตัวแล้วก็ถามแล้วก็ปิดไว้10 วินาทีแล้วก็บอกว่าทวนให้ฟังหน่อยสิมีทั้งทวนไปข้างหน้าเราเรียกว่า forward นะครับก็คือแถวบนแถวนี้นะครับตัว forward แล้วก็ backward เห็นตัวเลขแล้วก็ทวนย้อนกลับเหมือนที่เขาเล่นเกมเมื่อกี้นะครับเรามีข้อมูลตัวนั้นก่อนหน้านี้แล้วก่อนที่จะมีโควิดเราก็เอามาใส่เข้ามาในแถวที่2จะเห็นว่านี้เราเพิ่มเข้ามานะครับเราเพิ่มตัวแปรนี้เข้ามาตัวแปรนี้ก็บอกว่าworking memory ในอดีตมีผลกับ EF ในปัจจุบันซึ่งก็ไม่แปลกเลยนะคือเด็กที่มีทักษะที่สูงกว่าในอดีตก็มีแนวโน้มที่จะมีทักษะสูงกว่าต่อไปในอนาคตมันเป็นเรื่องปกติแต่ว่ามันก็เป็นการยืนยันว่าของพวกนี้มันสร้างมาจากฐานนะครับเพราะนี่คือเหตุผลว่าทำไมเราต้องสนใจตั้งแต่เด็กประถมวัยเด็กประถมไปเรื่อยๆเพราะว่าฐานมันมีความสำคัญอย่างน้อย on average คืออย่างน้อยในประชากรที่เป็นโดยเฉลี่ยเนี่ยอันนี้เป็นเรื่องสำคัญเราจะไม่สามารถรอมาทำทีหลังได้นะครับและที่น่าสนใจกว่านั้นก็คือว่าถ้าเราเทียบ2แถวนะครับ2เป็นคู่ๆนะครับแถวที่เราใส่ working memory เข้าไปเนี่ยโดยเฉพาะตัวแปรที่เป็นอายุก่อนที่เราจะใส่ตัว forward กับ backward ก่อนหน้าโควิดเข้าไป age มันเห็นสตาร์ไหมครับคือผมใส่ดอกจันนะเวลาไม่มีดอกจันแสดงว่าไม่มีนัยสำคัญทางสถิตินะครับวิธีอ่านง่ายๆอยู่ดีๆพอใส่ forward กับ backward เข้าไป age ไม่มีนัยสำคัญแล้วคือพูดง่ายๆไม่มีผลถามว่าเพราะอะไรผมก็ไม่มีคำตอบนะครับผมเดาได้2-3 อย่างหนึ่งเด็กอาจจะอายุเยอะแล้วนะครับสร้างต่อไม่ได้คิดว่าไม่น่าใช่ก็ไม่ค่อยเชื่อเท่าไหร่หรือจริงๆแล้วปีกว่าๆที่ผ่านมาเกือบ2 ปีเนี่ยเป็นโควิดถูกไหมครับเด็กไม่ได้ไปโรงเรียนพออยู่รู้สถานะเขาก่อนโควิดคือพูดง่ายๆหลังจากโควิดผ่านมาเนี่ยทักษะหลายๆอย่างเขาไม่ได้เพิ่มเลยนะครับพอเรามาวัดโดยที่เรารู้ก่อนหน้าโควิดมันเลยไม่เกิดอันนี้เดาเอานะครับยังไม่ได้พิสูจน์ 100% แต่ว่ามันก็เป็นอีกเรื่องหนึ่งที่อาจจะเป็นไปได้ผมคิดว่าวันนี้ผมไม่ได้มาให้คำตอบแต่อยากจะมาชวนให้เห็นว่าถ้าเรามีเครื่องมือวัดที่ดีเรามีเครื่องมือวัดที่น่าสนใจวัดทักษะที่น่าสนใจประกอบกับข้อมูลที่เราเก็บมาอย่างดีในอดีตมันสามารถเอามารวมกันแล้วสามารถทำให้เราเห็นอาจจะเห็นปัญหาที่น่าสนใจในอนาคตอาจจะนำไปสู่คำตอบที่มีประโยชน์ได้นะผมว่านี้โชว์ให้เป็นตัวอย่างเฉยๆนะเช่นเดียวกันอีกอันนึงเราวัดด้วยนะครับเพราะตอนนั้นเห็นเขาวัดกันก็คือเดี๋ยวนี้เขามีเครื่องวัดแรงบีบมือนะครับเพื่อจะมาไม่แน่ใจว่าวัดไฟมอเตอร์ไหมแต่ก็วัดนะครับก็จะเห็นคล้ายๆกันนะครับ hand strength ผมเรียกว่า hand strength เดี๋ยวนี้ไม่กี่ร้อยบาทนะครับสั่งซื้อจากเมืองจีนได้นะครับอยากลองวัดสนุกสนานนะครับก็วัดแล้วก็จะเห็นว่าตอนที่ยังไม่ใส่ working ใส่ forward กับ backward เข้าไปก็มีผลนะครับเด็กที่มีกล้ามเนื้อมือที่แข็งแรงกว่าก็ทำการทดสอบได้ดีกว่าถามว่าเป็นเพราะมันต้องใช้กล้ามเนื้อมือในการทดสอบไหมไม่แน่มันอาจจะเป็นเรื่องของ nutrition ก็ได้นะครับครอบครัวที่มีโภชนาการดีกว่าเด็กก็มีกล้ามเนื้อมือที่ดีกว่าหรือเปล่าผมก็ตอบไม่ได้นะครับแต่ว่ามันนำไปสู่คำถามคล้ายๆกันกับเรื่องน้ำหนักเราก็พบว่าเด็กที่ overweight นะครับถ้าเราไม่ใส่ backward กับ forward เข้าไปก็มีแนวโน้มที่จะทำคะแนนได้แย่กว่านะอันนี้อาจจะเป็นเพราะว่าเด็กที่ overweight อาจจะไม่ได้รับการดูแลใจใส่เรื่องโภชนาการคืออาจจะกินเยอะโดยที่ไม่ได้มีการควบคุมก็ได้นะครับก็อันนี้เดาเอาทั้งนั้นแต่ว่าผมหวังว่าท่านจะเห็นว่ามันนำไปสู่คำถามที่น่าสนใจได้กับข้อมูลที่มีอยู่นะครับก็อีกอันนึงที่เราทำก็ตอบโจทย์แรกๆที่ผมพูดก็คือเราวัดจริงๆเราทำ2 อย่างนะเราวัด noise ข่าวดีก็คือ noise หรือว่าเสียงระดับเสียงไม่ค่อยมีผลมากกับการนี้คือเด็กคงชอบเล่นเกมมากคือจะเสียงอะไรก็ช่างนะครับไม่ได้กระทบกับ so Federico what I told you before is incorrect I see your face ก็ noise ไม่ได้มีผลมากมีผลนิดหน่อยมีตัวหนึ่งแต่ว่าผมว่ามันไม่ได้สลักสำคัญมันฟลุกได้ที่จะโผล่มาหนึ่งอันที่ significant นะครับแต่โดยรวม surprisingly คือถ้าใครเคยไปโรงเรียนต่างจังหวัดจะเห็นว่าเสียงมันก็มีนะมันก็ไม่ถึงขั้นเสียงเหมือนกับสถานที่ก่อสร้างแต่ก็ไม่ได้เบานะแต่ก็ไม่ได้มีผลกับการเทสโดยตรงในขณะเดียวกันเราก็ทำอีกอันหนึ่งอันนี้บอกริคาร์โดตั้งแต่แรกคือเราอยากรู้ว่าลำดับมีผลไหมในการเทสเราก็แรนดอมลำดับเลยคือเด็กแต่ละคนเด็กแต่ละชุดที่เข้ามาเทสจะได้ลำดับเกมไม่เท่ากันนะบางคนคือแต่เราแรนดอมผ่านเว็บแอปพลิเคชันนะคนเทสไม่รู้มันจะแรนดอมขึ้นมาเองเขาจะดูตามตัวเว็บเลยเขาจะดำเนินการตามนั้นเลยก็พบว่ามีไม่กี่อันที่ลำดับมีความสำคัญซึ่งผมไม่มีคำอธิบายเลยนะว่าทำไม arrow ถึงลำดับในการ test arrow ซึ่งมีการ test inhibition ถึงสำคัญคือ test หลังจาก test ทีหลังดีกว่าคือแน่นอน test ทีหลังมันอาจจะเป็นเรื่องของอยู่ได้เรียนรู้แล้วว่าเล่นแต่ทำไมเกมอื่นไม่มีผลอันนี้เราทำตามที่ริคาร์โดบอกเราไม่ได้สุ่ม flies นะครับ fly เนี่ยเป็นอันสุดท้ายเพราะเราไม่รู้ว่า fly จะมีผลแค่ไหนเพราะอันนั้นเราไม่สุ่มเลยนะครับอยู่เป็นอันสุดท้ายเสมอก็นะครับรวมๆก็คือจริงๆอาจจะไม่ได้อะไรมากแต่ว่าผมอยากจะบอกว่าสำหรับผมก็เป็นประสบการณ์ที่ดีแล้วก็สนุกสนานแล้วก็น่าสนใจแล้วผมเชื่อว่าการที่เราสามารถเทส EF ในเด็กได้นะครับจะมีประโยชน์มากสำหรับหน่วยงานทางการศึกษาและโดยเฉพาะอย่างผมในฐานะนักวิจัย EF ที่เราเทสได้ตรงนี้มันจะไปประกอบกับข้อมูลที่ผมทำตัวอย่างมาให้ดูหวังว่ามันจะช่วยตอบโจทย์ว่าเราจะพัฒนาเด็กแบบไหนดีที่จะทำให้เด็กมี EF ถ้าเราเชื่อว่า EF นี่คือทักษะที่มีประโยชน์แล้วก็เป็นทักษะที่จะนำไปสู่ความสามารถในการประกอบอาชีพทำงานใช้ชีวิตในสังคมของเขาในอนาคตนะครับก็ สุดท้ายก็สรุปง่ายๆนะครับผมเชื่อว่าหลังจากใช้มา1 เดือนกว่าๆเนี่ยก็แอปพลิเคชันตัวนี้ใช้ง่ายนะครับแล้วก็เราแปลเป็นภาษาไทยแล้วในส่วนภาษาไทยก็มีระดับหนึ่งแล้วนะครับแล้วก็พอเอามาใช้จริงก็เห็นว่ามันก็มีความหมายคือพูดง่ายๆมันมีความสัมพันธ์กับตัวแปรที่ควรจะมีความหมายนะครับอย่างเช่นฐานะของบ้านนะครับแล้วก็ EF ในอดีตก็อันนี้ก็น่าจะเป็นหลักฐานอันหนึ่งที่บอกว่าเครื่องมือนี้ก็น่าจะเป็นเครื่องมือหนึ่งที่ควรจะมีประโยชน์น่าจะมีประโยชน์ในการพัฒนาการศึกษาของประเทศไทยครับขอบคุณครับ
Thank you very much indeed, both of you, for a fascinating presentation. I will ask Federico to begin.
Thank you very much, both to T and Ricardo, of course. It was a very intense presentation, lots of information and data. I tried to make some order in my thoughts. Let's start with T, which is fresh in my mind. One thing that was surprising in your models was the lack of school data, like cognitive outcomes or school performance. I guess it was not available, or
we have some. We didn't have time to put out and merge into this data yet. We have some. We have school readiness when they were like in kindergarten. And we have some test score. We have NT, if you remember this morning. We have some their NT score, but not all. As you see, some of them haven't taken a test yet. Taken.
Okay. And I think what's really important in what you showed is the possibility to easily implement it in a rural context. I think the fact that it can be administered without or offline, basically, is crucial if we really want to ensure equity, because it's not because we're in Thailand. I mean, even when we were working in the United States, there have been remote areas where internet connection was not reliable. So we really want to make sure that all students can join this kind of projects and we can include them, and that's great. And one other question I had in your last table about the order of the different tests. It's actually twofold. First of all, the tests actually go almost in pairs, no? Like there are 2 per each executive function. So I would have expected the order to be in blocks.
We didn't do that.
You didn't, because that could also, like, there could be a learning effect, like I just did an inhibition exercise and the next one I'm doing better.
Yeah, this is pure random.
Yeah. Okay. And the last one is, you seem to suggest that the increase in the test score depending on the order of the sub-test was pointing to the fact that, for example, arrows should be put towards the end.
Kind of. That's what the data suggests, yes.
But why? Why a higher score would mean that it's better?
I don't know. Maybe Ricardo has some idea, but but not the other, right?
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, I don't know yet.
Okay, it's up for interpretation.
No, it's a good question.
Okay. And then I had a couple of questions for Ricardo. You said that the test is designed in a way that students don't feel that they are being tested. Is that really possible? Like, well, I can imagine the teacher getting in the room. Today we are going to play, and we have these beautiful tablets. So it's a little hard to believe that students will not suspect that they're being tested, but at the same time, isn't there like a good amount of anxiety in terms of refining your focus and your concentration when you're being tested, which can be too much? But
yes, thank you for the question. I think this is a very good question. You always have this kind of anxiety, but the kind of anxiety that you trigger when you are playing in a kind of video game is that of is that of gaining the machine, you know. So you have this,
understand the
you have your mind set up is that you have to do it well in this game, okay? Is this the gamer anxiety and not the tester anxiety, you know? And you change that because when you begin to play, you have the psychological sensation that you are playing and that you have to score higher. And this is the classical gaming experience, not? And not that you are answering a good or bad question, or in a good or bad manner. And this kind of anxiety are totally different. And you know, and you can see that with children. Children are really having fun doing the task, okay? Even if they, because they can see if they don't make it well, but they really, they classify that more in the gaming experience than in the testing experience, okay? And this is very important.
So two things. One is when I went to the field, and we couldn't test only few students in the school. So some other student kind of try to light up and say, can I play? That's one thing. But the other thing, I don't have the answer, but I do have the data. We test the same kid twice. One is one that I presented without any reward. And then we, almost a month later, we came back and we say, hey, now, you're gonna play the same one, but now you're gonna get the money based on your score. That will help answer some of your questions later. Quite fun.
I have a couple of questions from the Slido. The first is, how did you determine wealth? How did you define wealth?
Wealth in here, we used assets. So we asked about like how many refrigerators you have, how many air conditioners, TVs, cars, and then we do some principal factor analysis. I mean, factor analysis is a statistical index.
Okay.
Because wealth is very difficult to calculate directly, but we use asset to be a signal for wealth.
The second question, I don't quite understand. What it says is, how is executive functions deployed in Thailand? How is it applied in education? Why must we only apply it in education? I think it's a reference to the test, which is, how did you, for instance, to choose the schools that you were going to use?
Oh, for us, the first round of this survey, we already have the sample 8 years ago. The kids we follow wherever they go. They go to this school, we go to that school. So, yeah, that's what we sample ours.
Okay, so the as part of that, you should explain that this was a validation exercise prior to a much larger rollout you're going to do.
Yes, and in June, we're going to launch an even bigger survey. So we're going to go to 10 provinces in the country. We're going to random some schools, both, I mean, in the city and in the rural. So we're going to collect about 2,800 children from kindergarten to 6th grade. So we're going to have 7 grades in total, about 400 each. So we should be able to do a standardized score for Thai children by then.
That's right. And within that, it will then, because of the numbers, you'll be able to compare more accurately rural versus urban, grade 1 versus grade 8, and also some of the schools that have been in EEF programs versus schools not in EEF programs.
Yes, we should be able to see something, maybe not definitely, but yeah, and I think that's the idea of this presentation, right? That I think what we do is to prove that EEF or other organizations can use this to measure the outcome of whatever they do. Right? I mean, if you say, okay, we don't want to measure just knowledge, right? You don't want to measure by just NT or ONET, fine. This is EF, and it's not that difficult to implement. Maybe it's not as easy as NT that you have the whole class, but it's doable, and I think that's the whole idea.
And I think the final question is why are you only applying it in education is simply that's where the children are. It's not simply a test of education, if you see what I mean. It's just you could wander around the streets picking up children, but it not so efficient.
It's just logistic reason.
It's logistic.
No,
reasons.
I mean you want to measure kids in slum as well. But
Yeah.
it's just logistic reason.
Any more questions from in the room? Any thoughts or reflections from yourselves?
I'll ask a very technical question. So I'm curious about the factorial model, and if you have any hypotheses about why you're finding a two-factor model versus a three-factor one, and then just a thought without knowing your data in detail. I heard you mention principal components analysis, and I saw you were using Stata, and wondering if maybe principal components as a data reduction tool might be the incorrect model for the factorial analysis. But and I'm just curious of what thoughts you have for that.
So when we do simple principal component analysis, it turns out to be, I mean, the program will retain like 2 or 3 factors, but only one factor has eigenvalue bigger than 1. Though I think it's part of it because in principal component analysis, you don't allow for correlation between factors, right? I mean, that's make a difference because when you go to confirmatory or structural equation modeling, so then you allow for correlation, and you can see correlation is very high. Yeah. Of course, it's not 100%, but it's high. So I think that's the reason why they behave differently, I think. And we would like to put the 3 in just because the original idea is try to have 3. If you want to check if it fit with that, but other than that, yeah, I still don't know yet.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. It is in fact a follow-up question to my colleague. I'm in the other extreme. I'm asking about you test a single factor model. Yes. And the reason why I'm asking is because of the high correlations between the latent constructs.
Right.
So, that would lead me to suspect that the single factor model may be of interest. And it also, of course, helps if you build more advanced structural models. And then that's the first question. Then the second question, as it relates to differences across gender between the 2 different contexts. What were your findings?
Okay, I think they dropped this slide. So I've answered the second one first because it's easy. It turns out that gender doesn't really affect the outcome. So surprised me too. I mean when we have a smaller sample, it seems doing something, but when we have 1,000, almost 1,200, then it's not significant in any specification. For the first one, I don't know, but we did try the one factor with structural model, and in very simple model that we have only one. It doesn't work. It doesn't fit the data as good as the 2 and 3. But when we run the independent factor, right, somehow it's kind of this still not. Well, it's not super clear, but somehow once you allow for correlation, we tend to go to the 2 or 3 factors.
Thank you very much. I have to confess that there were significant parts of the presentation which made no sense to me whatsoever, but I'm just really pleased that you told me it was all good news. Are there any other questions from in here? Yes.
One which tries to bring the conversation to the purpose of this event. Now that you proved that we can measure them, how is this policy relevant?
It's going to be a thermometer to measure any intervention that we do that we say we aim to improve EFs, right? Executive functions. I think this should be one of the thermometer that we use to measure that. And then it's a direct test. Of course, with some error, but I think it's manageable.
Yes, I want to complement this question. Executive functions are so famous because it is demonstrated that it can make better predictions than any other variable from childhood to adulthood in terms of health, in terms of well-being, in terms of lack of mental problems, okay? And this is a very relevant question because we used to use only IQ or grades or whatever indicators to predict life outcomes. And it is demonstrated that executive functions are really very good predictors of that, of adult well-being. And I think this is a very relevant question because of the first conference. I couldn't retain the name of the very inspiring first conference from today in the morning.
Oh, Dr. Vishan.
Yes,
Dr. Vishan.
Yes, because I think this makes sense to assess executive functions and not other cognitive variables like IQ or whatever. Okay, and I think this can orient better public policy because if you can ensure that children are developing well executive functions, you can be pretty sure that they will be good adults. Okay.
Absolutely. So I think we shall end there. I should also say that this research is part of this program, if you see what I mean, and that in addition to testing executive functions, it has been testing the ability to use tablets on a scale level of being able to work across the whole country in different terrains and so on and so forth, and all that kind of thing. And I think it will inform future assessments because the key issue I think that we're looking at here for the future assessments in Thailand is we don't want fun small-scale assessments. It's got to be on a significant scale, dealing with the real geography and society of Thailand, and that this has been very helpful in showing that this methodology, which could be applied to a number of different other assessments, is working in Thailand and delivering good results. So on that note, we shall go to coffee, and you have 15 minutes, and thank you so much to the two of you.
We don't have any real analysis yet, but you see some negative for some, positive for some. On average, it's positive. You see some negative. Though I mean, yeah, we did the.
Let's resume our stimulation, and this time I would like Alejandro Ibanez to take the floor.
My turn. Hello. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So thank you so much for EEF and CCE for inviting the CPLM Secretariat and CIMEO Secretariat for this wonderful event. It's my honor to be part of this amazing activity. I mean, the gathering of all the colleagues working in educational research. I'll be presenting on Southeast Asia primary learning metrics, primarily looking at monitoring and developing the ASEAN basic education through the Southeast Asia primary learning metrics, or what we call commonly known as CPLM. And I'll be speaking with my colleague, Mr. Anton Mariwan, who's also connected online to give us, he's going to represent UNICEF East Asia Pacific Regional Office to give us more insights about the technical updates of the program. So the scope of our presentation will be focusing on three major aspects. One is on, of course, in alignment with the theme of the seminar, that will be focusing on the program overview, just to give a sense of what CPLM is all about, and give a quick background of where we are right now in terms of implementation. The second aspect of my presentation will be speaking about the technical updates of the assessment and the instruments that we're using, primarily in consideration of new developments that happened after the pandemic hit us in 2020, also taking into consideration some of the issues that countries in Southeast Asia are facing. And finally, towards the end, I'll be giving you some updates of the second round of assessment, which is the second round of second cycle of the assessment program, which will happen in 2024. Also to give you a quick snapshot of what has transpired in the first round, giving you some data and findings and what are the issues that we would want to bring into the table in order to address some of the issues in the region. All right. So what is CPLM? The Southeast Asia Primary Learning Metrics is a regional large-scale learning assessment. As you can do a quick Google search, you would see that CPLM is along with other regional assessments in the world that's really designed for a specific region. And for the purpose of this presentation, CPLM is a regional large-scale learning assessment. And when we say learning assessment, it's designed to monitor student learning outcomes, focusing on grade 5 students, with a clear focus on literacies in reading, writing, mathematics, and with an added module of global citizenship, and of course, other essential skills important for learners. This is supplemented by contextual questionnaires, getting data from teachers, parents, schools, and learners. Aside from being a learning assessment program, CPLM is now also a capacity building program. We've built in the system a component where it tries to bridge the gap between data and practice. Learning from our experience in the first round, it's not enough that we only collect data for purpose of collecting data, right? We always have to look at the end in mind, which is to, at the end of the day, transform education systems in Southeast Asia. And that's what we intend to do in CPL. And I'll give more information on how we were able to transform the program and give emphasis on data-driven evidence, evidence-informed policymaking. Now, to ensure the sustainability of CPLM and to make sense of its importance in capturing certain issues in the region, looking at the collective issues that being experiencing by countries, but also capturing some of the nuances that each countries have experiencing, the CPLM, through the help of our participating countries, formulated a 5-year strategic plan, which is comprised of 3 major program pillars. And these pillars are drafted broadly in order to cover various areas that needs to be addressed in the implementation of the program. The first pillar is what we call Pillar 1, which is intended on methodological test development, putting in place rigorous standard and quality development in order to ensure that our tests are valid and reliable, coming up with certain procedures in place in order to ensure that our processes are also aligned with international large-scale assessment standards. Pillar 2 is an innovation for the second round of assessment. In the first round in 2019, we were very much focused on the survey, making sure that we collect data as much as possible. But for the second round, we created a space for countries to be together and create a platform where countries can learn from each other and actually discuss some of the issues that they have been experiencing. This is what we call Pillar 2, creating a space for knowledge sharing and peer learning, exchanging ideas on best practices, what works in terms of policy implementation, and what are the things that should be done, especially in the context of post-pandemic setting. Pillar 3 here is formulated to create evidence into digestible knowledge products. So we at the CPM Secretariat always takes a look at data and evidence, digging deeper, trying to make sense of it in order to produce policy briefs that will somehow, at the end of the day, hopefully will influence some of the policies happening at the national level in the region. So for Pillar 1, our goal is to generate comparative data, indicators, and analysis on learning outcomes and contexts in basic education. This is the flagship study of the CPLM. It retains the 5-year CPLM cyclical survey principles, where every 5 years we're expected to conduct and collect data. The first round happened in 2019. The second round will happen in 2024, and hopefully come 2026, we will be ready to collect another round of data in 2028. Our goal is to generate public and comparable data on grade 5 students' learning outcomes. This pillar is primarily concerned about ensuring that survey instruments and tools are contextually relevant to capture the region's nuances and align with the country's respective education agenda. Of course, while maintaining technical standards and quality, adhering to our regional technical standards. Under this pillar as well, on Pillar 1, this obliges CPLM to report on SDG 4 indicators, since we are internationally recognized to report on the ASEAN performance in SDG 4, particularly on SDG 4.1 and also on 4.7 for global citizenship. Our main outputs for this pillar will be to come up with a regional database every 5 years, and also a regional report looking at the overall picture of performance in Southeast Asia, but also to highlight some of the issues that are equity-related areas. We will also provide one national snapshot of preliminary results in 2025, and hopefully develop as well secondary analysis reports that will address some issues that are important, important that are being experienced by our countries. And also in the process of engaging countries in the program, hopefully we can also increase the level of institutional and technical capacity in assessment. For Pillar 2, our goal is to strengthen collaboration and exchange to improve system and school-level policy and practice in basic education through CPLM surveys and other studies. This pillar is really intended to create a space for countries to go together and learn from each other. This will activate what we call CPLM policy community, where we learn from countries' experiences, for instance, in addressing the learning recovery, and also trying to bridge the gap between how we can ensure that evidence and data is influencing programs and policies on the ground. So for this particular pillar, we have instituted regional workshops and regional meetings intended for countries to be together along with our partners from various parts of the world to give some insights and knowledge of what are the best practices in education, especially in curriculum assessment and instruction, and trying to look at the merger of these 3 areas and come up with a solid foundation for effective policies and programs. For Pillar 3, for Pillar 2, we have already produced a lot of secondary analysis reports that are, by the way, available on our website. www.cplm.org. Since 2020, we have launched 5 regional secondary analysis reports focusing on many areas. One is a report on gender, looking at the differences between boys and girls' performance, also highlighting issues of equity, especially in low-performing readers, looking at the conditions of teachers who are involved in basic education. This year, we have just recently launched a report on well-being, looking at child well-being and the correlation of that into academic learning. And finally, towards the end of the year, hopefully we can produce our data and our report on learning loss and compute based on the 2019 evidence how much have we are projected to lose given that there are huge amounts of school closures that happened in the region. In fact, if we're going to look at global data from World Bank and ADB, Southeast Asia has one of the highest number of school closures all around the world. So we will be trying to publish a report on that as well. Also on this pillar, we have tried to embed in the program a clear design in order to capacitate countries, both at the institutional and personal level. So we have partners from Korea Institute for Curriculum and Evaluation, the KAIS, and also Korean Educational Development Institute, or KEDI, who are our partners in order to try to make sense of the first round data in 2019, try to come up with dissemination strategy at the local level, and then at the policy level, what are the things that they can actually do in order to address some of the gaps that countries are experiencing. Just last week, I was in Seoul. We're doing a capacity building workshop on evidence-informed policymaking. And countries are being trained by looking at various evidences from various sources, from national assessments, regional assessments, and international assessments, and trying to make sense of all of these data in order to come up with good policy insights in order to shape conversations at the national level. For Pillar 3, our goal here is to promote and improve the technical capacity and the use of evidence, meaning we will try to transform all very complicated analytical insights into actual the knowledge products that are very easy to digest by the broadest audience from the region and also beyond. So finally, our CPLM tagline is by and for Southeast Asia, primarily because it is designed by the Southeast Asian countries and it is made for the Southeast Asian countries. To discuss more about the technical updates and some of the standards that we have implemented for the second round of assessment, I'll be inviting my colleague who is based now in France, and I think he's online, Mr. Anton Marivan, who will give us a glimpse of the snapshot of some of the insights that we were able to gather in the first round of assessment, and also moving forward, what are the things that we have modified and innovated in order to ensure that the second round is more sustainable and more effective. So Anton, please.
Hello, good afternoon. I hope everyone can hear me well.
Yes.
There is some echoes, but I will manage that. Okay, thanks. So can we move to the next slide? I'm super happy to be with you today. Unfortunately, I cannot join physically the meeting, but I think I will be very efficient and I will discuss interesting results with all of you. Can we get to the next slide, please? Yes, so as mentioned by Ali, I think CPLM survey, you understood, it's based on cyclical principles. We are computing every 5 years data from comparative tests, but not only, because we have also questionnaires and strong methodology for assessing comparison between countries and students and schools. So all questions and materials have been co-developed with each participating countries. And also we try to engage other Southeast Asian countries at every stage. So for example, Thailand has been invited since the beginning of CPLM to develop the framework and to discuss about how far we want to balance the test. So I will also mention here that we are also in collaboration not only with country, but also with strong recognized experts from all over the world. So I should here indicates that we have been collaborating with ECR since the beginning of the development of CPLM. We have strong guidance to highlight and also compare performance patterns between time periods, region, and subpopulation. So all population enroll at grade 5. And also we are encouraging countries to include more and more marginalized schools and students in the sampling. I think that's part of the credibility of CPLM, is to get beyond the national pictures. All data are collectively collected from a nationally representative sample of the whole population of grade 5 students. So we give a really strong picture of every 5 years of the whole population. So what I will present just after is the photography before the learning COVID-19 pandemics. Until now, we have reading, writing, and mathematics. All tests are paper pencil tests. So it's curriculum approach, but also with some touch of literacy approach. And it covers not just one grade, but it covers all skills we consider as crucial from early grades to end of primary education. And as you see on the slide, we have in total equivalent of about 4.5 hours of test, which is, when we want to describe the performance of students, very crucial. But fortunately, thanks to different techniques, we administer only 1 hour of test per each student. So we have different skills, as you can see on the screen. From reading literacy, we have recognized words, which is early stages of early grades in primary education, as you know, but also we have a lot of tasks we are trying to assess where students are to interpret and reflect on different various texts, from document to literature text. In mathematics, it's also the same approach. We have not just knowledge and application, but we have also skills to see how students are ready to translate what they have learned in mathematics to day-to-day tasks. We have also a writing literacy domain, which is very new in the area of comparative large-scale assessment. So in this model, in particular, where we are comparing languages between different countries, we are trying to explore how far students are ready to manage coherence using different set of vocabulary, managing and controlling syntax. We have a series of criteria to code the different sample of written response prepared by each student. Can we get to the next slide, please? On top of the student tests, we have also a lot of questionnaires, 4 questionnaires from students, questionnaires, parent questionnaires, and through parent questionnaire, we can have a very solid approach of measuring a social economic index. Thanks to the parent questionnaires, we have also school questionnaires and teachers questionnaires together. We can collect not just input, but also some attitudes, practice, behaviors, values, on different set of questions we agree together before starting each cycle with each of the participating countries. So all questionnaires are available online for everyone if you want to get access. Together we have the potential of 400 variables to address children experience, school environment, attitude and values, and of course the global citizenship education module, which is not a cognitive test for this first one of CPLM in 2019, which was more, and I will develop that later. I will explain that later a bit more. So next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So what we got from CPLM 2019 setting, 6 out of the 11 Southeast Asian countries participating in the first round. So unfortunately, we didn't have Thailand, but I think most of the findings can be transferred, translated, adapted, and probably compare for Thailand vis-a-vis of the learning structure and performance. Almost 30,000 students from total of 6 participating countries were administered with a test. It represents at the end millions of students, and we can extrapolate the result on millions of students at grade 5 in the region. It has been translated into 9 languages, so it's also a challenge for the countries particularly, and also to make the result credible, because it's not just one language of instruction and 2 languages as for the region, but in this region we have multiple language of instruction and sometimes more than 1 language in each of the countries. Can we get to the next slide, please? And of course, all these parameters which probably change over time in the region for later. So before starting with sharing with you some results, I would like also to share some patterns of structure of the context of some of our participating countries. So even before comparing some differences between quantitative data, we can see even from the structure of the primary education systems that the length, the entry stage, exit stage of primary educations, and how countries are officially considering basic education is changing a lot from one country to the other. You can see from this graph, we are not, when we speak about basic education and primary education, we are not sometimes speaking about the same structure. So this is all the context we need to consider before going to interpreting the result and trying to compare the result. Next slide, please. Same for the number of official language of instruction. So countries apply one of the language of instruction to the test. And in some countries I mentioned, Malaysia, for example, it's not just one language, it's Chinese, Malay, and Tamil, because we have different set of schools depending to the language of instruction. In Philippines, also interesting case, Philippines country decided to apply the test in English only for 2019. And I would say from now that for the second round of CPLM, they have decided to apply the test in Filipino and English as well. So you see, I think also how far the students speak one constant language also from early grades to grade 5 also can also have a big impact on the capacity to respond to the test in general. So passing to the next slide, I think it's important to acknowledge what has been done for the region. And I think this one is a critical key output from CPLM 2019, and it will build the strong pathway for all Southeast Asian countries for later. So thanks to these 3 proficiency scales, I know it's a lot of volume of information. I think I did it on purpose just to show you how many information, quantitative, qualitative information we have to report student performance in each reading, writing, and mathematics. So all these proficiency scales, as other programs done, are developed on the basis of children response. So they include not just proficiency description and bands, but also we can describe from each of the bands how complex knowledge and tasks are and how students are ready to perform on each of these scales. So for scales, we associated a color. So reading is red, writing is blue, and mathematics is green. So you will see later, the more the colors become darker, the more the children is able to measure, to perform on the concept measure. So, and the more the color is light, the more there are difficulty to respond to the simple task. Yes, on this slide, you see a bit the overall performance. Total 6 countries for the first round of CPLM. So you see we have a good range of breakdown of performance between level 6 and between level 2 in reading, but we know that we are still, and unfortunately we still have some many children even in the best performing countries, we are still at level 2, which is comparable to early grades levels after some weeks in the grade 1 of primary education. So this is alarming. We know about that. This is part of the learning crisis, and this is what we are trying to share with everyone today. And thanks to the CPLM model, we can also share not just quantitative results, but also, if you click Alejandro, you will see appearing, yes, this text, which is representing the higher level of the scale. So you see on these scales, on these bands, students have to read, but also have to complete the task by associating different implicit information to complete the text and trying to imagine what could be the next of the story. This picture is representing the lower band of the scale, so you see associated one word to one isolated image, but we still see some students, even in the best performing countries, who have difficulty on this slide. So if we go to the next slide, please. Yes, so this one is, this graphic represents the total percentage of children by country in each reading scales. So you can see it's large variation across the 6 countries. Variation in performance. For instance, we still have at grade 5, as I mentioned, 2 to 82% of the students who are able to get to the final stage band 6 and above, which is also representing 4.1b SDG indicators. So for some countries, the pathway is still very long, for example, in the region. And also then we see the variation even between range 1 to range 2, which is also a big parameter across all of the 6 participating countries. And also because at the end of primary education, we see that children are still, some of them not meeting the minimum proficiency, meaning that they will probably struggle to transit to secondary schools if they don't have the normal support. But also we need to acknowledge that each student can move to one band to the other with simple and targeted support to improve the learning and increase the chance to pass to one step to the other. Well, next slide. So this one also is representing on the same approach a benchmark on SDG in reading. So we can also summarize a bit more the sample, the scales, and identify how many students achieve the SDG 4.1b, level 6 and above, which has been defined for the first round of CPLM with a qualitative approach, not a quantitative approach. But thanks to that, we tried to match official international definition, and we found that level 6 was representing SDG exit stage. So you see some countries there is a lot of variation in the region. That's very interesting to see that. And it's telling many stories, as you can see. We have also the same approach, of course, for writing. And of course, writing is a bit different because here countries are not just responding to multiple choice or short order question, but they need to produce are not on the same page, and meaning that different support needs to be provided. Can we get to the next slide, please? Because it's also the same model. I don't want to comment too much, but you see for mathematics, we have also the same level of approach. I think also what is important, as you can understand, that with CPLM, we can address a lot of the statute of learning and what type of factors we should involve, try to describe a bit better, but also what kind of drivers are important for learning. So I think there is no real new comes with that. It's just confirmation. We thanks to CPLM, we can just zoom on some particular category of students. For example, here the characteristic of low performing readers, and we can explore some of the pattern of factors who are associated. For example, from the 6 countries, this is very constant between the 6 countries. Being a male, attended a rural school, did not speak the language of instruction, had household responsibility, did not attend preschool, had repeated the grade, are evenly correlated of being low-performing readers. On the opposite, I think we can also do the same approach, same analysis for high-performing readers or high-performing writers. So you see the model is very powerful. And what will be very important to explore is how far it will involve also from the first round of CPLM 2019 to 2024. Can we get to the next slide, please? On the same model, I think there is an appetite in the region. It's not new to compare gaps between boys and girls, how girls are performing. So on this slide, the analysis doesn't show only the average gap between boys and girls, but try to zoom on if there is any gap of performance between high-performing boys versus high-performing girls. And we see that in most of the countries, in most of the domains, girls are performing better than boys, and there is more girls who achieve the higher levels in reading, writing, and mathematics. And meaning that, particularly in writings, boys have more difficulty to producing an original response than girls. This is one example. And of course, we can explore more and more. Then what the attribute, what the school experiences for boys and girls. And we see that finally, when we try to explore the characteristics of boys are also repeated more, at least 1 year than girls. In some countries, boys are entering later primary education than girls. So we see this kind of patterns, and this is very useful for countries, not just to testify that there is some difficulty, but also to try to put some priorities at system level, and also to confirm other results from other source of data. Next slide, please. Yes, academic resilience is also a strong focus we had from our secondary analysis. So this one is a bit original because what we try to look is at the resilient angles. So we try to see if there is some differences between the countries on a category of children we consider as resilient. So the one who are from the lowest quartile, 25% of the socio-economic index, but who are performing very well on the proficiency scales. So our lower Southeast Asian backgrounds perform well in reading in comparison to other participating countries. And you see here, one country, Myanmar, has the largest percentage, 17% of academically resilient children, which is 3 times higher than the percentage of academic resilient children in one country. So this is also some pattern of response we can explore. And in addition, we can also, on the top of this description, trying to understand what factors are also better associated of being an academic resilience. So you see library, spending more time, having more language lessons per week are frequently, for most of the country, associated with being more an academic resilient. So I think that's part of our schools should consider all students and should make provide different input and practice to at least correct a bit the effect of backgrounds as primary education. So this is enormous information we share with each country, and we discuss with each country in webinar, and we cross views from different side of practitioners and also policymakers. Regarding this is also one good example regarding the differences between teacher training. We see that some of them in some countries feel not ready to use ICT. You see a third column, particularly in some countries like Cambodia, in Laos, is not surprising, while some of them are very well advanced in some countries like Vietnam, and they seem more confident to teach ICT, for example. Same for differentiated instruction. I think this is something we can cross with what I've been presenting before about the learning crisis. It seems there is still some difficulty from some teachers to manage different classroom with different patterns of performance. If we look into the input also ICT in classroom, I think I selected ICT because I think it's very predominant now in many countries. There is a great appetite to discuss about how far with the pandemic we are to equip all schools, are particularly at primary level. So you see in most of the countries there is not yet a computer in the schools, even if some countries are doing better than the others. Even in some countries there is not yet power outlets, so it's not surprising, just confirming, and we will see after COVID-19 if there is some changes and variation between the countries as well. Next slide, please. Well, important topic, sensitive topic. We have, of course, I discussed about learning, variation, disparities, equity, input, practice, but also we can speak about some aspect of well-being. And we have, through our questionnaires, we try to understand how students were on at school. Do they feel safe? Is there some bullying which is occurring oftenly? So you see in this section, it's not by the results are not provided by countries, but I provided regionally. Of course, we can break down by country, and we know behind that there is behind bullying, offensive behaviors. There is also, in most of the case, this series of indicators are associated with higher achievement. And this is something also we will continue to explore in the next round of of CPLM. Now, moving to the global citizenship, so I hope it will give you the appetite to go beyond in the result, but also from the socio-economic and well-being approach, we, as part of CPLM, we receive a mandate from the first one of CPLM to speak about global citizenship and concept. So this is very primary education focus, and we consider that it's dealing with global citizenship, but not only all derived topics outcome in primary education. It has been co-developed by campus and experts from ACR as well. And we consider that in this primary education context, it covers not just citizens of the globe, but also how children are interconnecting with life on the planets, life in their school, in their classroom, life in their family. So it's not just a full global approach, but also it's connected with peaceful justice and sustainable place. Here you have a quick summary of the different questions. So it's not a cognitive approach because we are at grade 5, it will be very limited, but we have a series of topics to explore the values for children and teachers, how they value some indicators, environmental sustainability, for example, in the different questionnaires. Can we get to the next slide, please? So you see here is one of the examples. We have probably 30 slides about that. And here it's about teachers' perspective. And we are trying to understand. Sorry, I cannot see anymore the slide. What's happening? Yes, example from the student perspective here. Yes, thank you. It's moving forward now. We are trying to explore how far students in each grade 5 feel close to the national and regional identity. But of course, it's just single questions. Of course, we don't have focus interview. We don't have full understanding of the situation. It's self-reported response. So we ask how far they belong, as they think they will belong to the country of the test, feel of being ASEAN, feel connected to the rest of the world. So you see in most of the countries, variation also as well. In some countries, on some specific question as the last one, countries, a student at grade 5 seems not yet ready to feel common patterns between children and the rest of the world. So this is part of the example of result we have from the global citizenship questions. And generally, I think what we got from the overall pictures of questions, all children show a particular interest, positive attitude on issue, affecting the local communities, particularly the local communities versus the regional, national, and global communities. I think it can be explained because of the relative young age of children, particularly on environmental issues and social cohesion issues. We see a focus and interest for children on this topic. Our environment was probably, from all of the topics, the most reported topic by all children before learning crisis, before the COVID-19 pandemic, of course. Most of the teachers indicated they felt prepared and confident teaching the topic listed in the global citizenship questionnaires. Of course, it needs some confirmation because it's self-reported by students. And what I would like to highlight before finishing on the global citizenship, that is less than 60% of children identify themselves as ASEAN at the end of grade 5. Of course, there is still a long pathway before the end of basic education. I'm done from my side, and I think Alejandro will continue on the rest of the presentation. And thank you very much for your attention. I hope you will have plenty of questions and very pleased to follow. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anton, for the presentation. So just to close off our presentation for CPLM, I'll be talking about the CPM 2024 and what lies ahead for the program. So as mentioned already, at the regional level, the goal of CPM is really to develop robust learning assessment systems. That it's not just about gathering data and collecting data, but in the process of engaging countries, we would want to develop at the national level robust learning assessment systems that will monitor learning outcomes. And also, our short-term and mid-term goal is really to come up with good policies that will be able to have an effect to the children of the region, and finally contribute to a more equitable and meaningful education in Southeast Asia. So what is the value of CPLM and in various levels? So first, at the global level, many of the countries who joined CPLM mentioned that CPLM has been one of their mechanisms as one of their national commitment as a follow-up to the Transforming Education Summit that happened in New York. So many countries, world leaders gathered in New York last year, and the commitment there was to really address the issues on foundational learning, which is a very apparent issues all across countries. And so one of the many mechanisms that countries would want to address is through the CPLM program. They would want to come up with good policies that will be able to address the foundational learning crises. Many of them also use as a way to monitor SDG, the CPLM monitoring of SDG 4.1 and 4.7. And this is also in line with the midterm review of SDG 4 indicators. And hopefully the third cycle in 2028 will be the final reporting of countries before we reach the 2030 SDG reaching. And at the regional level, this contributes to ASEAN cooperation and engagement. CPLM is part of the education work plan of ASEAN in 2025, and also builds on cross-border dialogue and accountability. At the national level, we are included in many of the education agenda of all the countries who were part of the CPLM program, and also part of their agenda in many areas in education. So the entire CPLM is actually an entire village of stakeholders involved in the program. So we have the two leaders or two co-chairs, the CIMEO Secretariat, and also UNICEF East Asia Pacific Regional Office. And for the second round, we have the help of the ASEAN Secretariat and also the ASEAN Korea Cooperation Fund. And we have here the participating countries and all other countries in Southeast Asia who are considered as honorary members, including hopefully Thailand. We have partners, KEDI and KAIS, ACER, and CAPSTAN, who are technical partners in both at the technical development of the instruments and also at the capacity building level. So as I've mentioned, we contribute to regional growth and development, and we are very much aligned with the region's direction in terms of growth and development in all facets of metrics of development. Oh, what happened? Anyway, so finally, to end this presentation, I would like to conclude by saying that the Southeast Asia is really much keen to really increase the performance in SDG, but also to take a look at collectively the issues. And hopefully through the CPLM program, we will be able to increase the performance of many of our children in the region. Thank you so much for listening.
So, thank you very much, Alejandro and Antoine. It's been very interesting. I think it's a new initiative, so I think many people were looking forward to find out more about what you achieved. I have a couple of questions about some of the features you presented. First of all, if you can tell us a little bit more about why such a new initiative in 2019 decides to go for paper and pencil. Of course, the local realities may be challenging, but it may be just as challenging to transition to ICTs in the future. Then I was wondering whether you had the opportunity to look at the impact of language on the results. I briefly saw some odds ratios about the fact that the students spoke at home the language of the test, but of course most of these countries have a variety of languages that was shown in the slide by Antoine, but those are the official ones. There are so many others. So that can be a factor that have a significant role on the student performance. And the last question is maybe the most delicate one. There are a couple of countries that really stand at the extremes of these scales. So how is CPLM useful to them when you have a very extreme distribution? Thank you.
Right. First, on the use of paper and pencil, that's a very interesting question because the first round happened in the pre-pandemic context, meaning countries do not have a clear appreciation yet of the importance of ICT, you mean before the pandemic happened. So more or less, and as you can see in the data, 20%, less than 20% of schools or classrooms have one working monitor or computer, and that's on the regional data. That means it's really possible for us to go digital, primarily because we would also want to reach the most disadvantaged children who are most probably living in far-flung areas. So the most feasible method of gathering data would be paper and pencil. For the second round, we decided to use the same approach in order to come up with comparative data. Because if we used a digital modality, there might be issues of comparability and many other statistical issues. Second question is on the language. Clearly, language of instruction is really important. In the Philippines, it's a very unique case because in the Philippines, there are two languages, Filipino and English, but the assessment was done in English. But the use of instruction inside the class is both English and Filipino, including as well some mother tongue language as well. So that really complicates the situation. And we saw in the findings that Philippines got very low score. Children who have different languages taught in school and used at home tend to have low performance. So clearly, data is telling us that there should be clear alignment between the language at home and language used at school. And finally, the last question is on the extremes, right? So you have here Vietnam getting 82% proficient learners compared to, let's say, Laos having 3% or something. That extreme scores, we have been considering that as well. And clearly, many of the factors contributing to that are a lot of things. Equity issues, issues of income as well, and issues of clear gap between, because when we look at the policies, more or less they're the same. It happens on the implementation. The issues are happening on the implementation side. For instance, Vietnam has championed digital transformation even prior to the pandemic. So that factored into the idea of maybe they're performing well. And Vietnam's performance is also consistent. The same with PISA result. They're also doing well in 2018 PISA, hopefully in 2022 as well. So that extreme, we're trying to bridge that huge gap between good performing countries and not so good performing countries. But CPM is trying to, that's why we embedded the component in the program that builds capacity building. That in the process, we hope that countries will learn from each other and helpfully pick some best practices that they can use and implement back in their countries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was fascinating. Picking up on something Federico said there seemed to be a correlation between feeling I am part of a country and how I perform. Which do you think comes first?
Interesting question. Well, what I can say is that learners have a sense of their nation first, before the ASEAN first. And that's
Yes.
one thing that we are actually trying to take a look at, because there seems to be awareness of the ASEAN identity and ASEAN culture, but there's no sense of identity yet from the learners.
Yeah.
They always take a look at themselves as from Myanmar, from Laos, from Vietnam, but not as part of the broader ASEAN region. So that's something that we are working with ASEAN, and they clearly have some programs to address that. But in terms of academic learning, that's something that we still have to check whether your views of your sense of nationhood, for instance, have a clear impact learning. And that's something that we can explore in the second round as well, since we're going to take a look at the growth of that in the second round, in second cycle of assessment.
Yeah, I mean, it was particularly notable in the case of Laos, with the very low performance and the low identification with your host country. And in some of my experience, I think it's the low identification with your host country that leads to low performance, because you don't see the point of school in a way, or that you see the point of school as being to make you Laotian, which maybe you don't want to be. So there is a resistance. And I've seen similarly in Europe where, for instance, Turkish refugee parents in Norway are suspicious of school because they think they're trying to make their children Norwegian as opposed to educating them. And I think particularly the parental influence on supporting child is very influenced by that. Are there more questions from the floor on this? No? Okay, I think that was a very comprehensive presentation, and thank you to your colleague for joining us online as well. And we shall now give the floor to Todd.
Great. All right. Well, thanks to the organizers of this special 3-day event to have invited me to come. I'm happy to be here with all of you. And also the slides I'm presenting, of course, they are available if you're interested. So I'm going to talk about creativity, give you the kind of global overview of what this is about and how we have come to measure it these days. Okay, so has it moved? Where do you point this thing? What? Yeah? Ah, yeah. Okay. Wait a second there. 1 second. Okay. So, since we're at the end of the day, and I don't want to go all evening with you because I suppose you have things to do later on, you see, this story begins about 2 million years ago. So I have to go kind of quick on the first 2 million years to leave time for the last 20 years, where most of the stuff happened. So about 2 million years ago, our ancestors showed their creative thinking when they made tools to hunt with. At least this is our first trace that still remains today, is they had the idea that instead of hunting with stones that have a good shape naturally, they would transform the stone and make a tool. This is a conceptual leap, a creative act, if you will. And then over time, the tools got better and better through a kind of continuous cycle of creation, invention, innovation. And so Homo habilis, about 2 million years ago, is an example of the creative spirit that's come along to us today. But if you look around in this room, or in the room where you are if you're online, just look at about everything you can see, and you see its creations. The chairs you're sitting on were created. In the beginning, there was no chair to sit on. There was perhaps a rock to sit on. The whole idea, obviously, of visual graphics, of text that represents words, that represent something, all this is created and accumulated creation. Now, fast forward to the 21st century, when we're talking about the 4 C's, which were mentioned a little before: 21st century skills, creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, communication. There are other 21st century skills in a longer list, but these 4 are always mentioned in the list of 21st century skills. If you take, for example, global entities like the World Economic Forum, it lists recently creativity as one of the top 3 capacities important for employability in 2030. OECD The Siri, for example, did a study in more than 10 countries, including Thailand. Frederico was involved with it. Stéphane Vincent Lancran was leading this particular study, and it was examined to what extent creativity and critical thinking can be taught in different countries. And of course, we have here several people who were involved in it, including Paul. In 2021, PISA includes creativity as a special domain of competency to be evaluated. Okay. So here is a very brief summary definition of what creativity tends to mean. Of course, we can make a more elaborate version of it, but creativity refers to the ability to generate new productions, new ideas, new things that are meaningful in their context. Okay? So, what does it mean, something that's new, that's original? At least it's original for you who generates it. But maybe it's original also for people around you, socially speaking. And maybe it's even original for everybody in the whole world, like very original in a global historical way. Okay, but when a child generates a new idea that is original for the child, it is a creative act, even if the adults already thought of that idea. Now, you could be creative in almost any task, in any domain. Here's some examples that are often cited. A creative writer, a creative scientist, a creative chef, creative visual artist, an inventor of technology, creating something at home with stuff that's hanging around, or publicity in business, entrepreneurial creativity. Some of these domains are prototypical creative domains because much of the activity in the domain requires original ideas, okay? But there are other domains, for example, being a manager, or being a teacher, or being a lawyer, where sometimes creativity is very useful, but not all day long in every task. A teacher needs to sometimes invent a new lesson, let's say. So there are moments when creativity comes into a vast number of jobs. Now, if you're talking about a yet more restrictive category of work, for example, pilot of a plane, in principle, they are not chosen to be very creative when they fly the plane. And you should pretty much respect the rules and the procedures, but occasionally, or astronauts too, occasionally they need to invent something to save the plane or the spaceship or whatever, okay? So it does have what's called survival skill occasionally. Now, we can talk about creativity, but I'm going to focus on creative potential, which is the latent state of being able to generate this new original stuff. And in education, in children and adults, often what we hope to measure and promote is creative potential so that you could put it into play if you needed to. Okay? Okay. So how are we going to understand creative potential? Well, I'd like you to think of the metaphor of someone in their kitchen. You look in your refrigerator, you look in your cabinets, and you have ingredients hanging around. You have some chocolate, you have some eggs, you have some flour, you have a stove, an oven. And so you have ingredients, you have potential to make a cake. You have perhaps more potential to make a chocolate cake than a lemon cake because you have no lemon, thereby restricting your potential. And then, at the moment, it's just sitting there, it's potential. You turn it into a cake through the process of cooking, which is the arrow that you see from potential to production. And you end up with a cake. which is more or less good. So in this case, the ingredients of creative potential are certain thinking skills, the cognitive skills, like mental flexibility, associative capacity. Certain cognitive factors, personality factors, like openness to experience, risk-taking, or emotional factors, for example, a rich emotional life, living things emotionally in a rich way. And certain environmental ingredients. Perhaps you are surrounded by people who are stimulating you. Perhaps you live near museums in a city with lots of events, and this is stimulating you. And these are the ingredients of your creative potential, which means that you have more or less possibility at the moment, in a latent state, to be creative in this or that domain of activity. If you have knowledge, that's a cognitive ingredient, about culinary things, you have more potential to be creative in the culinary domain than if you know nothing about ingredients and how to cook. So you engage the creative process, you produce something, you created something. It doesn't mean it's very original, you just created it, that's all. And in terms of creative production, we can evaluate that, as we said, against what you've done in the past, or against a social reference, what other kids did or can do, what other people did, can do. Okay. Let's take a famous case, because often when you think about creativity, you think about the famous creators. Let's take Van Gogh. He is a famous case. He was successfully creative in a major kind of way. Well, if you look into his life, you'll notice something is that in his life, you can find the different ingredients that we mentioned. For example, he had knowledge of other painters, notably Jean-François Millet, pictured there, who painted people in the French countryside doing agricultural work. This inspired Van Gogh's compositions in a major kind of way. He had Paul Gauguin, who was hanging around as an artist friend, not all the time with Van Gogh, but at the moment when Van Gogh produced the most creative works, Gauguin was hanging around in Arles, a French town. He lived at the yellow house of Arles, which is still there and is still yellow. And this was a very good place for him, a good environment. He felt good. He was in a good emotional state over there. And so this was a good moment for him. And Theo Van Gogh was giving him financial support, allowing him to focus his energy on painting. And so during this time, all the ingredients came together and he had a creative burst. He was not a super creative artist his whole life long. He had a moment when he did most of it, in fact. Okay, so let's talk about potential. This ability to develop, achieve, succeed a desired future state. It is latent. It is like the walnut. The walnut could become a big tree. It has potential if it falls in the right ground and it rains enough, etc., etc. But it could also become part of your salad, or it could become part of the ground, or a souvenir you put on your desk, or a science experiment sent on Mars to grow as a tree, perhaps. And so it has different potentialities, okay? Or part of a toy, okay. Now, Ribot was a famous French psychologist, unknown outside of the very limited circle of those who study creativity in France. And he wrote that every normal person creates more or less. It's part of our daily activity, daily thought. And sometimes we invent something already invented. So this was the idea of reinventing. And he also said creativity is not a generic thing. It goes by domain. So there's artistic creativity, numerical or mathematical, scientific, practical, mechanical, or engineering, commercial, business, and what he called utopian, moral, political type creativity. So he said we should really talk about creativity in a situated domain context. Okay. All this is the background to get to the moment of measurement. So now that we have a shared understanding somewhat of what it is, how are we going to measure it? Well, we have to first decide if we're going to measure accomplishment or direct potential. Okay? Let's talk about accomplishment. I could say, what have you done? Show me what you've done, what you've accomplished. This is not your potential. This is sort of the trace of what you've been able to do. And we would say, it suggests if you're already able to do a lot of stuff, you can do more. You must have had potential that you turned into accomplishment. Okay? It's like the tail of the comet. If there's the tail of the comet, there must have been the comet that left the tail of the comet. Okay? And if the comet's coming around once, it's probably coming around again in a few hundred years. All right? So we have ways to measure creative accomplishment, which are in fact measures of creative future potential. If you've already accomplished, you tend to do it again. And so this works, for example, we can count the number of notable works someone has done. We can show your work to a panel of judges. We could analyze your work with some kind of a checklist scale. Is it banal? Is it elaborated? We could ask you in an interview, what have you done? And you say. Or we could have an activity report of how much, how often you have done stuff. But all this works best for people who have the chance to do something, like adults in a job. It doesn't work very well for children, okay? Oh, whoa. Okay, sorry. All right. Wow, I see. There's a little bit of a trend to go super quick on my slides. Okay, why? Well, what I'd like to say here, if it works, yeah, is that we're going to, in children, we're going to ask them to engage in a creative act in what we could call a simulator. So we put you in a simulated situation. We say, let's see what you can do to a child or to an adult. And we ask you to engage your potential in a special case situation. You would normally not have done it, but since we asked, you will do it. Okay? Here you have the Torrance test of creativity, an example item, where you have to use parallel lines to make many drawings. This is what we call divergent thinking. Generate lots of different ideas. This is a very famous measure that you perhaps know. Here you have a test of Urban and Jelen called the TCTDP, in which children are given the first picture where the artist, as we say, started to make a few lines, and then the child must complete the picture. You see one child in France completed each line to make it an object. Another child made it what is called there the elephant tank, okay? This was well before Ukraine and all, this is years before, but in any case, so here is what we call an example of convergent integrative creative thinking, because they have to potentially use what's given and make one single thing that's a bit involving all the elements. Okay, this leads us to the idea that we propose in our battery called Evaluation of Potential Creativity, EPOC. And this battery, we first published it in 2011 after around 10 years of preliminary work. So now it's been out there since then. All right. Okay. So in this battery, we measure creativity by domain. Artistic graphic is one domain, literary verbal, social, math, science, and we also have music domain, and we're working on a last domain of body kinesthetic movement domain. It's available in various languages. It was used here in Thailand for the OECD study. So altogether, it's in a certain number of different languages. We have norms in France, and in some other countries, they're doing a norming process. But it can be used already without norms, at least for a research tool or for a local kind of use. Okay, so how does it work? In this battery, we measure both divergent exploratory. We give a task to generate many ideas. And this is an example from the graphic domain. Some kid in France generated 10 drawings using the banana shape. This is one kid. Now, is 10 good? Well, it turns out that since we have norms, we know that a kid of about 9 years old in France will generate about 10 drawings in this task on average. So this is average, okay? In the convergent integrative task, we give them graphic elements they must put together in one big drawing. Here's an example of one kid who used our graphic elements, like the hat, the light bulb, which is blue, we give, the carrot, the black rock, the fish toy, the mannequin in wood, etc. And they made a bedroom scene. You see, they kind of just placed the objects there in the bedroom scene. So they accomplished the task, they created something. It's not very original, it's not very integrated. It'll get a low score in our system. You see another kid made a fishing scene, more integration. The fisher person there who's fishing is saying, I'm gonna catch a fish, okay? And this is a common idea. It's getting a middle score. It's not too bad, but it's not too good. Whoa, sorry. There's a bit of a hyperactive thing going on right here. Whoa, I don't know why. I'm sorry about that. If I can get back a little bit. Oh my gosh. Oh. Whoa. It has gone really crazy there. Okay. Well, I don't know. Let's see. Oh, okay. All right. I'm not moving. Okay. So here's two other kids with the same objects. They made an integrated drawing which has got a higher score on originality and integration. You see, they put it all together, and you have the rabbit made of the valise body and light bulb feet with carrots as ears. There's some unusual use of objects in here, too. You have what was called the warrior here, where the body is made of the light bulb with a fish as its head. The carrot and mannequin make the sword, etc. Okay, in Brazil, I'll show you a few drawings from Brazil. Kind of low. Using the objects in a typical house scene, the only unusual thing is that there's a snowman in Brazil. Okay. But we're not going to give it a great score for that. Okay, here's a better one, more integrated. This is the kind of psychedelic marionette idea, okay, using many of the objects. And here you see a kind of transformer type creature that is made of the different objects. So these are showing more integration, more unusual thinking. Now, we have a system where you can upload these drawings, And judges can look from distance and give a score on 7 points. And you see here that they can see many different drawings and compare them, and this helps judges at distance judge all of this stuff, leading us to get good interjudge reliability. On the divergent part, we just measure the number of ideas, which is easy to count. Why? Because it turns out that the number of ideas generated is highly correlated with all kinds of fancy originality scores in divergence. And probably the key to divergence is generating a lot of stuff, because as you go further in divergence, you tend to generate more original stuff. Guess what the correlation is between fancy originality scores in divergent part and the number of ideas? Who says it's around 0.5, which is not bad? Who says it's 0.67? Who says 0.8? Who says 0.9? You got it. 0.9 or above. So I say, let's make life simple and count the number of ideas. Okay? All right. Now, so here's how it works. The child will do in each domain divergence and convergent tasks. They'll do 2 so that we don't have a single moment of measure. Okay. And we have them do it on 2 different moments. For example, in the drawing task, at one moment it's with the pictures you saw. At another moment it's with geometric forms, so it's more called abstract drawing. In science, at one moment it's with scientific issues that are concerning physics, chemistry, and so forth. And the other moment it's scientific issues concerning what you'd call human science, sociology, economics, so forth. Okay. Okay. So we put this person or child in the simulator and we see, let's see what you can do, turn on your potential. I already said this. Okay, just to mention that scoring is relatively fast and highly reliable in terms of interjudge. Okay, let me show you another domain, mathematics. Here we have a divergent task. The math domain is on the computer or on internet. So in this, we have, using numbers, you have to generate 7 as many ways as you can. So this is divergent algebra, in fact. All you need to know is at least the 2 operators like plus and minus, but if you know more, you can do more. Since you're scored against other kids of your grade level, that's okay for this task, okay? You can say, well, this task is getting too easy at high school. It is getting easy, but they're scored against each other, so it's not really a problem, in fact. Okay. And an example from Hungary, 341 kids did it. They give you an idea. They had 10 minutes on this task. The average was 13 ideas or so, standard deviation 8. One kid gave 1 idea. They got to 7 once in 10 minutes. Another kid, 54 ideas, okay? And so I just show you an example of what's a high or low frequency, but the example gives the number 8 because that was the task they had in Hungary. Okay, convergent thinking, you have to use our 9 numbers and at least 2 operators to get to 1. So you give 1 single answer. And we score this in terms of statistical rarity based on a database of answers given in the country. And we score it based on certain mathematical principles that tell us it is, let's say, shorter is better in this task, for example. Because if you do a kind of a long string of operations that goes in an infinite thing until the task is done, and you finally get to 1, it's very easy to get to 1, and it's very meaningless almost mathematically. So the shorter, the better here. It's like aesthetics. We also have mathematics with figures, geometry. Divergent thinking, you have to make many different figures. And this is just an example. And you have to make one big figure using all of our elements that we provide. Now, the more your figure has sides, the more you get points in this task. And we measure the originality of your geometric figure. The kids know this is a measure of creativity. There's no secret to them. They know they're supposed to be original. It's what we call a power test. And by the way, I'm showing you what we use in general, but there is a way to use these tasks in what we call dynamic testing, which means that the kid does the task, we get their score, and right away we give them a hint to help them go further. And we give them more time after that to continue. And we see if they do more, if they do better, if they change stuff. So this is the dynamic phase, as we say. So there's the normal task, then there's a hint given to them, like you could try this, could try that, and we see if they go further. And so we have what's called their zone of proximal development in a way. So this is what we call the dynamic testing mode for these same tasks. It can be interesting in an educational situation. We also have music, for example, on the computer. So here we give the beginning of a musical notes, and you make many endings in Divergence. Or we give a multi-layered compositional screen where you have 3 instruments to use, and you can play them like a little band, and you make one big composition. Okay. So we have all these various domains. And so I think you get the basic idea of how this battery can work. You could give just one domain, or you could give several domains. Now, we use an IQ-like scoring system to facilitate the meaning of the scores. So 100 is a normal kid. 15 points, standard deviation. This means that most kids fall between 85 and 115. If you got a kid falling at 130, it's what we call creative gifted, or high potential. Now you see DG is divergent graphic, DV divergent verbal, IG integrative graphic, IV integrative verbal. And to be what we call high potential, you need to be pretty much at 130 for the divergent and integrative parts. If you're only good on divergent, not good on integrative, it's like a motor of a car that has 2 pistons and only one works. So where does your car go? Nowhere, okay? All right. Now here is a profile of a certain kid. So you can see this individual is relatively strong in divergent graphic and integrative graphic, and average or so on the verbal. So this kid has a so-called creative graphic profile. But sometimes you get kids who are good in divergence in everything and weak in integration in everything. For example, this is useful for teaching or forming groups of activities in school. Okay. We've done various statistical analyses. You already had the chance to discover confirmatory factor analysis earlier today, so I hope that was a pleasant experience. And so I have to show you a graphic or two, but what I'd like to note here is that our confirmatory model proposes that different tasks we give, for example, the 2 graphic tasks, abstract and concrete drawing task, they do go together to form an integrative graphic subscore, okay? And the integrative graphic, IG, goes with the DG subscore, divergent graphic, to form a graphic domain score. And so the system of scoring that we propose has empirical support, is what I'd like to say, okay? Now, there is a very small bit of factor G, general factor of creativity, but we don't focus on it because it's relatively small compared to what's happening in terms of domain factors. And so we don't think it's that valuable to give some kind of, we could kind of extract this little bit of general factor, factor G juice, but it's very teeny. Okay. Now, we did a study in France and in Hong Kong to compare the test and its factor structure. Our question was not, are kids in France or Hong Kong more creative than the other place? Because, by the way, they're judged against other kids from the other place by judges who are from Hong Kong who understand the drawings of Hong Kong. So you can imagine we're not about to say in one country they're more creative than another, okay? But the factor structure is the same in those two samples, which is good news for us. There's what we call structural invariance, whereas if you take another test that you might know called the Wallach and Kogan creativity test, there is not structural invariance across countries, which means that what you measure in that test, in each country, they add up to different factors underlying it. It's a very confusing situation, in fact. Here's a study of judges, because as you know, in the convergent integrative, kids produce something, like a drawing, or like a big story, or like a big musical composition. And we need some judges who are trained on models from the country to give a score to this kid. So what we do is we form a panel of super judges in the beginning with the normative data, and they determine scores for different stories, and the stories that all the super judges agree are worth a 7 out of 7 go into the pile of training module. Or all the judges agree it's 4 out of 7. These are good examples for us to train future judges. So in comes someone who can be a judge. It could be a teacher. It could be a psychologist. It could be another person who's got some background, let's say. And they will train to criteria. We will know that they understand the system when they give the right answers, as we say, okay? So it's not a personal opinion that we want. And we have shown that if you take a non-trained judge who simply reads the manual, they will, among them, already show interjudge agreement alpha coefficient 0.78 in our system. Without any training, just read the manual and look at our examples. But once we train them with showing them they give an answer and then we tell them the right answer until they pass our test, as we say, then that judge will show an alpha of 0.91. So this is showing that we can, in a way, enhance the scoring by training judges to criteria. Okay. Now, here comes the million-dollar question. Why test? Why should we test creativity? Some people, when you say we develop a test of creativity, they say, you're a horrible person. It cannot be tested, and by saying you can test such a thing, you diminish its beautiful nature, okay? And we say wrong to those people, because what is important in the world is measured. It gets a score, and it gets even more important. In the word evaluate is the key letters value in the middle of that word evaluate. When you evaluate, you give value, okay, to the thing. And so by designing a test that allows us to measure creative potential, we render it tangible. Teachers, they see what we're talking about. Children, they see what we're talking about. When you have a child who produces a drawing, and a child say, what do you think? You think it's very original? They go, yeah, I think what I did is great. Okay, everybody in the class, put out your drawings on the floor. Let's look around at all the drawings. The kid comes back and he goes, what I did is totally normal and banal, okay? What have they learned? They learned what we're talking about, because the word original, it's a little bit vague. And they also just gained benchmarks. And suddenly now, if you give them the task again, they understand a little what we're talking about, and they understand what's going to be out there from other people. And so if I want to be creative, I need some knowledge of what people do, okay? And so it's a very meaningful thing for them to get to compare what they did to other people in the class, for example. So what do? We, first of all, how's our timing? 1 second. Our timing is okay. All right, so why do we test? Sometimes we test because we want to check if some kind of learning experience, some kind of pedagogical package, some kind of pedagogy has an effect on kids for their creativity. So we need a pre and post measure, okay? Otherwise, it's like I roll out my pedagogy, I try to boost their creativity. It looks to me like they're more creative, so I'm happy about it. You know, what is that? Is there any proof? Okay? So here we have a tool that allows us to do pre and post. And we have versions of this test, Form A, Form B, et cetera, which are parallel versions, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. A second use is we say we want to identify some high potential, high creative gifted for some special program or something like that. So the only way to do that is to have benchmarks in specific tasks. So it's not like just bring in what drawing you did at home during the weekend, because that's a vast, vague kind of thing, okay? By the way, to give a kid a creativity measure and say, draw whatever you want, invent a story about anything you want, this is one of the most horrible tasks to give as a measure of creativity. It looks nice, but first of all, the kids tend to just bring out a thing they already thought of, they already saw. And second of all, for the judge, it's like a nightmare, okay? So we like a restricted thing where the universe of ideas is somewhat limited, somewhat restricted. And finally, we could measure these creative potentials to get a person's profile, like you saw, so that we can develop some kind of personalized training program that would fit what they need. So if you have a kid who's weak on integrative verbal, but strong on divergent verbal, you might say, maybe this kid can get quite creative in the verbal domain as a story writer if we can boost the integrative component, because that's the part that's not so great. So in any case, we could, again, like everything, have the summative or formative mode, or also I'd say the dynamic testing mode, okay? All right. Here's a result coming from a country where you are geolocated right now, Thailand, okay? This was some data, not the full data set, from the OECD study that we had mentioned in the 10 countries. So this does not represent any kind of a final thing. I'm just using it as a graphic illustration of the kind of result we obtain. So these are classrooms in Thailand. There are several classrooms that are called control classrooms, where we give a pre and a post, and the teacher just teaches normally, like normal. And there's so-called experimental classrooms where the teacher tried to boost creativity, okay, with pre and post. Now, the pre is blue and the post is orange. The DE is divergent and CI is convergent integrative. DE is divergent exploratory, divergent. And so you see that the control kids go up a teeny bit from pre to post on divergence. The experimental classrooms go up significantly more, okay, suggesting that the teachers had an impact on these kids. In terms of convergent integrative, the controls go up pretty well from pre to post. In fact, they learned a lot by taking the pre already. It was somewhat of an effect on them. And the experimentals go up too, maybe a teeny bit more, but not significant in this example, suggesting, as the literature shows, that it's easier to boost divergent thinking than convergent integrative. So this is not a new result. It's just a demonstration of what we can do as a pre-post. But the story is not finished. If the slide wants to come. Okay. I took the data from different teachers, teacher A, B, C, up to G. These are all teachers of the so-called experimental classrooms, where they tried to boost creativity. You have the pre and post for each teacher. So look at teacher A. Their class went up from green to blue, pre to post. Teacher B, it went up a teeny bit, almost not much. Teacher C, it didn't go up at all, okay? It went down a little, but in the margin of error, let's say it's stable. So most teachers here, it went up, but not always as much, right? So the really best teachers were G and F and E, I'd say, okay? So we might be interested in say, what did you do in your exercises, you three teachers? Because the other teachers who tried had a very small effect or almost no effect, really. They were all experimental teachers, showing that there's variability in the experimental group, okay? Okay. Now, perhaps you're wondering, how is this creativity stuff different from regular intelligence? And here we have to get back to the very beginning of time. You may recognize that photo of Alfred Binet, because you know that some of the first intelligence tests that later were taken up by other authors, including Wechsler, on the Wechsler IQ, started with the Binet-Simon test. In Paris in 1905, Binet and Simon were ordered by the Ministry of Education to develop a tool to detect the ability of children at school because some kids at school were failing. The ministry said maybe they're failing because they're not capable, so it's normal they should fail. Maybe they're failing because they have a bad home environment or whatever or something, and they are capable, but they're still failing, okay? And so Binet and Simon developed a huge battery of things that fit into what they called generally intelligent behavior. And in that battery, there was reasoning, there was memory, there was getting the right answer quickly, there was knowledge about the world, et cetera, et cetera. And there was what they called measures of imagination ability, or creative thinking. Turns out that that test was super long, and when they analyzed it, they found out that not all those tests predicted school grades in France in 1905. And so to cut down the test time, they removed all the things that didn't predict school grades, including all the imagination part, thereby creating a separation between IQ and creativity. And what went into imagination became what is known as creativity tests. So it's expected that they should correlate very low, for example, okay? In general, we observe that IQ and creativity are correlated in the 0.10 to 0.20 range, positive but very low. Meta-analysis says 0.17. And school grades and creativity correlate on average 0.215, but sometimes you see 0.3, sometimes you see minus 0.2, meaning the better you are in school, the less good you are on a test. That's a result that we observe in France. And when you observe it, you say, teachers, that's kind of weird. Those who get the good grades in school are actually the worst, in a way. They're the more on the low side, on the creativity. And they go, yeah, that's great. Why is that great for them? Because they say, creativity and imagination are not on the national program. Therefore, that they don't do well in the thing we don't teach is normal and good. Okay? All right. So here's an example of kids. This was a sample of about 100 kids or so. They took EPUC and they took the WISC-4. And so you see the correlations are all relatively low, sometimes negative, but the ones in bold, 0.28, 0.26, those are significantly different from zero correlation. So essentially, they're unrelated or a little bit positively related to different indices of the WISC. So essentially, this is a result like expected, that creativity measures and intellectual ability measures are relatively unrelated to each other. Okay. So let's see. Yeah. And here's a bit of a summary. So I was trying to convey the idea that creative potential is a complex concept. There's several ingredients and the process underlying it. We can assess it, and we can develop it perhaps by focusing on activities that support the divergent or the convergent integrative aspects. Now, some people say it's kind of a pity to separate the divergent and convergent. This is we did this to get a better handle on the measurement of the main components of what's in the full process, okay? So we artificially divided up, to some extent, the measurement mode into two subtasks by domain, you see. But in the full creative act, divergent and convergent are mixed together, and we understand that when we test something, we always have to model it in a somewhat restricted way. So that's my email. You can send me an email 24/7, anytime you want, and one day I will try to reply to your emails. Okay, and if I don't reply, send it again, 24/7, any day you want, anytime. Okay, so we have time for questions.
We certainly do.
And that's what you're here for. You came live or you came on Zoom. Okay,
We'll start with Federico.
So thank you, Todd. It's always very stimulating. I still have in the back of my mind that we are evaluating actually achievements rather than potential, because we are actually tasking students with a creative process rather than...
Wait, let me take that question.
Yeah.
Before he gets to finish his question. Creative achievement is something a person does in their regular real life. Maybe they were asked to do it at school because it was an assignment. Maybe they were asked to do it at work. Maybe they did it spontaneously at home because they felt like writing a story. But it's something they did, quote, of their own will, okay? Creative potential is measured when we say, oh, hello, there you are, sitting there doing nothing. Listen, I have a task for you to do right now. It's creativity on demand. It's like, oh, you're sitting there? Let's see how fast you can run down the hall and come back. I'm going to test your speed of running. It's your potential to run. You were not running. You had no desire to run. And I say, let's go see what you can do. That's why it's a measure of creative potential. That's our answer to your question.
I'll think about that.
Yeah.
No, I think my main questions were about, you mentioned that for some languages you have norms.
Yes.
So from an applied point of view, what's the value of this course when you don't have norms?
Okay. When you don't have norms, you can already do your pre-post study of a pedagogy. So for example, someone they had a drama-based pedagogy experience of 10 weeks of classes. They gave pre, they gave post, they saw the boost in a raw score way, in a country where there was not scores or whatever, okay? Or raw scores can allow you to have individual profiles of kids, raw score, to form pedagogical groups in a classroom. So raw scores have, if you're doing a study where you say, what's the relationship between something, school anxiety and creativity in some country where we have no norms? You can still do the study and find out the relationship because you can do your correlation based on raw scores.
Okay.
So,
and the last thing is, you did touch base on that. So pre-post, there is the need, of course, for control groups and treatment groups. Can the test be developed as far as that control groups would not be necessary? So that we can positively say there is no learning curve due to the previous exposure to the test, or we know there is and we correct for it. Because implementing controls it's an expenditure for a project.
Definitely. That's a very good question. When we norm the test, we norm it in a very specific, we norm it in two ways. We norm it that the main normative sample does, they do first form A, and then they do form B. Therefore, if you had no control group, you could give the kids form A at pre and form B at post because the norms are developed to handle this situation. But we also have norms in which, some special norms in which kids take form B first, okay? But we do not recommend it. Form B is designed to be given after you eventually had form A. So, in fact, you don't even need the controls because the norms are developed, but you need the norms in that case.
When you measure the creativity potential across country, do you take care of the cultural difference? Like the Westerners' creativity may be different from our Eastern one. And then like Thailand, I really appreciate, every time I come, I find the people are very creative. And then they really create a space for the young people to develop different kind of creativity. Not necessarily visual, not necessarily written, but like I see the mall have a very spacious area for people's body expression. They have dancing area, and then I really appreciate this different kind of creativity. That is, I think, is some kind of combination of the West and the East. But like Hong Kong, we have the Hong Kong creativity industry. Make creativity become an industry rather than expression of the passion of the young people. So how to take care of this kind of creativity when you measure Hong Kong, Thailand, and France?
Okay. So we use the same task everywhere, except that what you should know is that the kids are compared to other kids of their country each time using judges of the country each time. So kids in Thailand are compared to other kids in Thailand judged by judges from Thailand, which see the cultural meaning in whatever these kids produce. Now you could say that some of our pictures or story prompt, whatever you want, are perhaps more or less typical in certain countries, okay? So the banana is more typical in some places and less typical than another. But for us, it's not a real problem because since the kids are compared to other kids of the country, the banana is, let's say, rare in that country for everybody in that country, okay? And so this is how we handle the cultural issue. But we pay a small price to have done such a thing. The price is you cannot say some country is more performant than another country. No. There's not an international comparison. You can only do the study we showed where we looked at factor structure. By the way, the study was done in Slovenia. The factor structure is identical to France and Hong Kong data. And Slovenia developed national norms, and it's recognized there as a way to measure creative giftedness in the Slovenian education system. To give you an example of a country that went through the process. Yeah.
What's the relationship between creativity and learning?
Well, in fact, you could say that in a rich learning experience, the child or adult is brought to create new knowledge for themselves, or quote, reinvent if we want, or invent. So full learning experience actually is a creative knowledge construction experience. And also, you could also say, well, if you learn about a topic, you have knowledge about it. This, in general, leads people to be able to show greater creativity or not. But if they don't have the knowledge, it's a bit limiting. So take your question in the two different ways.
So in this case, you use the what we call local criteria in scoring, right, for each country. So you different criteria. And
Same
the
criteria.
that criteria that you build it from the people in the student in each country, and then you construct what you call the local criterion for
Norms.
scoring, right? And would you like to do you think of using international criteria, for example? Maybe it's not norm, but you collect all the data from every country, and then you construct a criteria based on that, and then you can have you can compare to each country.
You could try to do this kind of international norm, especially, I suppose, for the divergent side of things. It might be feasible to try such a thing, but it would be saying, like, how much has a kid got strong or weak divergent ability in a domain compared to kids in their country, or compared to some world sample of kids mixed from all around the world. You could do such a thing. It would get tricky for the integrated aspect, because different judges from around the world in this super panel around the world would not appreciate the cultural meaning of these different drawings. So they might judge, but I'm not sure quite what it would mean exactly. But but in general, I would like to say that the scoring system in each country is the same. In other words, the 7-point scale for low to high integrative, the 1 to the 7, they have the same meaning. Okay? So if I take the drawing, which you saw, but I could do it for other things too, you saw that there were different objects. How many objects you use of our objects is one of the things that giving you points towards 7. If you use all our objects, it's better than using only 4, which is the minimum. If they're integrated in, each object becomes its own little drawing, this is not integrated at all. You're going to be low by definition. If you made a little scene, like the fishing scene, you're going to be middle or middle low, middle high, depending what your scene is. And if you made a single entity, you're on the high side, unless you made a single entity that a lot of people makes, for example. Because those objects crystallize to form scenarios, scenes, and stuff, depending on the country. Okay? So that's why it gets a little bit tricky, and we have essentially avoided the tricky issue with our culturally specific solution, let's say.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you for your inspiring conference, Todd. I'm wondering if we have any data about the relationship between creativity potential and personality traits.
Yes, there's quite a lot of studies on that. More in adults, but also in children. The personality trait that always comes out is openness to new experience. So that's always positively correlated with creativity measures, be they divergent or integrative, usually correlated in the 0.3, 0.4 about. That's the, you can count on that. Other stuff that gets in there too is, for example, sometimes traits like extroversion, but not the sociability side of extroversion, the quote dominant side, like like leadership, like trying to get your idea across, that side of extroversion often comes out as a positive correlation too. And then the rest of it starts to depend on the subdomain of creation. But there's, in adults, lots of studies. In children, quite a few also, but yeah. We have a question. There's also some questions.
Do we know what is the age that the creativity potential is kind of mature? That would be one question. So related would be, I'm thinking about taking this test into my longitudinal sample, for example. So then would tell me at what age I should measure that, because then I can follow up and see how, if this potential can be predictive of adult outcome.
Okay, well, the tests I showed you, we use them with kids from kindergarten, elementary school, middle school, high school, and university level. We use the same tests, and of course the people are compared to other people of their age. So it is subject to development all across the lifespan, in fact. So it's something that can go up or down on an individual level. There are some moments that are known to be, quote, a temporary slump on average, although there's a bit of debate on that issue. But for example, often when kids leave elementary and go to middle school, the first year of middle school, there's a slump on average. Maybe because they're stressed or whatever, okay? When kids go from kindergarten to first grade, there's often a slump because they discover the reality of school with grades and all that stuff, okay? And it was fun until then, okay? But I'd say it develops, perhaps it somewhat stabilizes in early adulthood until you go into your career domain, and then we'll see, then it may move around, let's say. In lifespan studies, it tends to reach a peak. The peak, on average, depends on the domain. The peak in mathematics domain is earlier than the peak in history or writing. Poetry, the peak is earlier than writing a novel. And after that, on average, in the domain, there is a slow decline. Essentially, most of the time we think the decline is in productivity, which generates a decline in originality or creativity, because there's like what we call the hit rate. And according to some authors, your hit rate is pretty stable. So someone can have a hit rate that they produce 100 ideas and there's 2 good ideas in there. Someone else has a hit rate, they produce 100 ideas and there's 4 good ideas, all right? And that seems to be relatively stable unless you give them training, okay? But your productivity changes dramatically over the years. So how many years do you produce 100 ideas? You see? And so this is like a major effect. And so anyway, this is a bit of reply. So yeah, if the quick answer is, it's good to test at any age.
Taking a question from the Zoom.
Screen. Yeah, the Zoom. Yeah.
Can you provide professional development to teachers to improve student creativity?
Yes, you can. There's kind of, let's say, 3 ways to go on that professional development. One way to go is to teach the teachers some creative thinking techniques that they can transmit to the students. So you teach them a brainstorming technique or other techniques, and they can show it to students, and that will help the students. Another way is that the teacher will learn to adapt their pedagogy or introduce creative activities in their pedagogy, thereby giving students a training opportunity. Another way is that the teacher will become a good judge of creative work, and so the feedback they give will be more meaningful rather than just, I like it, I don't like it, okay? And the final way is that the teacher will serve as a role model. This is perhaps the most difficult thing to train, because you got to train the teacher to be a creative role model, and then the kids can see how the teacher engaged their creativity.
Absolutely, that's great. We'll make this the last question because we're almost
Thank
at
you
close
for
time.
a very inspiring talk. That was really comprehensive also. A lot of questions that I have you answered during your talk, so that was excellent.
Okay.
I just have, like similar to what has been raised earlier, and you were also referring to that point about making the ratings within country. Makes perfect sense, but still I would find it interesting just to see how things would be rated maybe also in other countries.
Yeah.
Because just as per se, I mean, it makes total sense for your purpose to have it within the country. But now we're talking about a more and more globalized world, about wanting our children to be actually like successful in a globalized world. So it would be interesting for once to understand what is the meaning of creativity across different countries, and second also to understand if someone has actually the knowledge, as you say, what is creative in this context, that context, and so on, because that will actually, I guess, make an impact on their overall success with their creativity, or their overall impact. So for me, actually, it's a very good point that has been raised by a couple of others also. And then just also I'm super interested to see more about how creativity, or the skill of creativity that you're measuring, how that relates to other skills. Because in the end, again, you can have a potential, but to really have an impact, I guess you would need to sometimes also even swim against the current, you know, like the greatest thinker of our time sometimes went against the stream, so to say. And maybe you need to be persistent to believe in yourself, you know? So I would be interested to know more, maybe in the future that would be an idea to look at. And also just a comment more, because you said like it's important to know where everyone is standing in the classroom, because maybe then I realize, oh, I thought I was creative, but in the end I'm not. Just to emphasize that, of course, the interpersonal comparison is very important, but also intrapersonal from a learning perspective. Where did I stand? Where am I going? More and more advancing. That will actually have an impact on my learning, my and the skill of creativity. So for me, still, both are important. Actually,
Definitely. Yes, definitely. And so you can, with this kind of measure, giving the different tasks, form A, form B, whatever, you can see intra-individual growth, okay? Since the person can say, well, maybe I wasn't great, but at least I see I moved ahead, okay? And so that's totally true. And of course, I join you on the various points of interest, like, for example, perseverance. It is a personality trait that has been shown to be sometimes quite important in adult creativity. When you give kids a task that's short term, like 10, 15 minutes, you don't need that much perseverance, okay? Except that perseverance is in the task already. Because when you give a task 10 minutes to a kid, generate all the endings of the story you can, most kids, after 3 or 4 minutes, they go, good enough. And then we say to them, systematically, we say, there's more time, you want to keep going? And they go, yeah, sure. They think about 30 seconds, they maybe give one idea, and they go, that's it for today, okay? And what does that show? That it's not just that they got knowledge, they got ideas, that they got a motor that can turn to generate, but they need to have the perseverance, and they show it. In fact, it comes out in their potential, okay? So the biggest, let's say, thing that most kids or adults seem to have is that they don't go, in divergent part, they don't go far enough. I can tell you already, in our tasks, if you generate 10 ideas, you're on the common ground of what people generate. It's pretty hopeless for you, okay? So if you didn't generate more than 10, I can tell you right now, it's not going to go too well in the scoring, in divergence. Because what do people do? We generate the stuff that everybody generates, typically. okay? Because it comes to mind quickly. And so we stay on the common stuff. So there are certain thought mechanisms that are just so natural that you gotta work against them. And of course, you could imagine some kind of multinational judge panel and so forth. We could say that kids are exposed to the multinational culture of the world through internet already. And so it comes into their local sphere of life, and the local judges are exposed to it too. So the multinational aspect is already, it's there in the country judges to some extent. But it's an open debate. I do have to say Netherlands was part of the OECD study. So they did get to try EPUC a little.
That's absolutely brilliant, Todd. Thank you so much for that. Now, one of the things that we have tried to do in constructing this workshop is give people real time to talk, and Todd and Ricardo and T and so on and so forth, because when you have the time, I think it enables us listeners to really get into the conceptual undergrowth which underpins the work that you're doing. And I think I've really felt that in this afternoon in the longer presentations, that I understand much better what it is that people are trying to do and where it might fit. In terms of my question to you, Todd, it's relevant to where this fits in the workshop. I buy the definition that you gave, that ultimately creativity is about generating an original idea for you. And I think that is learning. That when you learn something, you don't remember it. It generates a new idea for you. And when you're with a child or a young person who's learning, you can see that moment when the light comes on in their eyes. And it's a personal moment because they have generated a new idea for them. And a lot of time in class, the light never comes on in the eyes because they haven't learnt something, but they will be able to go into the exam and write it down. And so when in constructing this workshop for EEF, we were concerned with looking at learning, understanding the impact of programs on learning, then we had to turn to creativity as one of the things that we needed to look at and so forth, because the creative potential of children and young people is ultimately central to their learning. It was interesting to see the comparisons you were making between the creative scores and other things schools are testing for, if you see what I mean. And you going, and the teacher said, oh, it's a relief they're no good at creativity because we didn't teach them that. And they're good at these other things, which to me, which they taught, but to me aren't necessarily about learning. We've been doing some work recently in Ireland, and Ireland have introduced a new, much more competency-based curriculum for junior secondary, which they've rolled out. And in the English exam, there had been set texts. This is 16-year-old, you have to read these texts. And the question on the set text was, what did you learn about people from reading this book? And the teachers were outraged. Said, how can you ask that question? I said, why? He said, well, we didn't know you were going to ask that question. So what was that? He said, well, we could have taught them the answer. And you went, yeah, but the whole point of the question was that we surprised you, so you didn't teach them the answer, because what we wanted to see was how much thinking they could do. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And that pressure in the system, where we want to be able to assess the quality of their thinking, is a pressure against which a lot of teachers resist, because they are going to be assessed on these exams, and therefore they want to teach them the answers, and therefore they want exams that have answers that they know in advance and they can teach to them. And you could see that, I think, a lot in the team's work today, you know, about all the tests they put online and previous questions and so on and so forth. So you can work out what the answer is, and you can teach it to your kids, because I want to be a good teacher and I'm going to be rated on how they do. And I think how to unravel that process to have curriculums which really deliver freedom to think, and then means of assessing it in schools and getting schools to accept that is a big challenge. And we will think more about that tomorrow. Thank you so much, everybody, for all your participation today. It's been an incredibly rich day, and we'll see you all in the morning.